Chapter 801 A New Field Part 1. If you want, I can propose a motion to help Larule to the council. No, thanks anyway. Lith recognized a failure when he saw one. The motion was bound to be a dud, and he would be indebted to a thung for trying. Moreover, the idea of a country where he would have no secrets to hide was beyond alluring. Lith then contacted Faluel as well, but her reply was equally lukewarm. The downfall of humanity in Giera had benefited the beasts even more than it did the awakened. The plague only affected humans, so now Giera belonged to plant folk and magical beasts. We don't fear the undead, no matter their numbers. Her interest in the matter was so little that only one of her heads was looking at Lith. Half of the remaining heads were asleep, while the other half was working on 3 different projects. Fuck me sideways, Lith thought. Lesser dragons might pale ass if she can work on 7 different subjects at the same time. Why my beast part is not a hydra? That's because unlike humans, beasts know about awakening, and emperor beasts take good care of their turf. I can slaughter an entire branch of any court on my own in a matter of minutes, and so can my peers. Humans are scared of undead for 2 reasons only. First, due to their dull senses, humans can't feel undead approaching, nor recognize them when they disguise among the living. Second, they are too used to have an overwhelming advantage in numbers. Despite the fact that they can live forever, undead are actually the race with the smaller population because most of the other races kill them on sight. The idea of having their numbers doubled is terrifying only for those who can't rely on their awakened. Why the Council of Plants or of the Undead don't do anything then? Lith asked. Awakened undead have no place in the courts and despise them. There's also very few of them because awakening an undead is much harder than a living being due to their blood core, so most of them are liches or awakened that turn to avoid death. Both kinds are very focused on their research and have very little interest in such trivial matters. As for the plants, awakening doesn't change someone's nature, so they are still a bunch of psychos. I trust them even less than humans. After talking with both his contacts in the council, Lith realized how small of an issue Larule was in the eyes of such ancient and powerful beings. They were probably capable of slaughtering Erlich and his army with a sneeze. It was just that they didn't care. The following day, after escorting Camilla to Javik's gate, Lith and the others returned to Larule. Professor Marth was waiting for them inside another treehouse, this one big enough to accommodate all of them. First of all, thanks for your help. Second, if you need to take anything out of your dimensional amulets, do it now. Larule blocks all kinds of dimensional magic, amulets included. Lyda approached each one of them in turn, placing her hands above their storage items to allow them to retrieve their weapons and some potions. Solus used her mana sense to notice that just like what happened for the house, the Dryad wasn't employing her own powers. She was actually borrowing the same energy that was flowing through the tree, manipulating it to temporarily bend the arrays surrounding them. Then, Lyda opened a gate that led them directly to their lab. There were several tables made of solid stone, arranged at a safe distance from one another. Some were occupied by complex machinery magical in nature, while others had tissue samples stored inside crystal cases and several magical items to study them. Even though it was barely past dawn, there were a lot of people at work, most of which were clearly foreigners. The people from the Blood Desert had brown skin and wore colorful clothes. Mages from the Empire were so pale that Lith wondered if they lived underground and wore clothes that, even though resembled those from the kingdom, they were made of a thicker fabric. Lith had never seen so many people with blonde and red hair in a single room before. Luckily, all the people in the Garland continent, despite their many differences, spoke the same language, so communicating with each other was easy. Marth quickly greeted his colleagues before bringing his ex-students plus Floria to the closest table above which the crystal cases were orderly arranged. After the events in Kulla, just like Quilla had decided to learn battle magic, Floria had decided to follow Ranger Erie's example and learn at least Tier 4 healing magic. Her problem was that she was just a beginner, still struggling even with sharing her stamina. Floria looked at the tissue samples hoping that Marth would dumb it down enough for her to understand. So far, the problem didn't seem something that could be beaten with a sword, making her second-guessing her choice to be there. Gods, I feel so useless. My career is slipping through my hands. I got attacked every time I left my home, and now I even have to pretend that I understand this stuff. I wonder if this week can get any worse. She thought. We're working on this for almost a month, so we've already understood how the plague works. The only thing left to do is to formulate a cure and then put it into practice. Marth took a crystal case containing what looked like a piece of bark the size of a napkin. The crystals were the only way to preserve the tissue samples without them disappearing like what normally happened to a piece of a plant folk once it was separated from its main body. This is a fragment of the skin of a healthy Trentling. He gave it to Quilla for examining it while teaching the others a Tier 1 diagnostic spell that worked on plant folks since normal spells would have been of no use. What the heck? Floria blurted out after examining the crystal, almost dropping it in surprise. A common diagnostic spell would simply allow the healer to identify what was wrong in the patient's body, but would provide no information about their anatomy. The spell that Marth had taught her, instead, had allowed Floria to see even the single cells inside the bark as if she had used a powerful microscope. She had felt the life and the will inhabiting every single cell that composed the bark. Unlike humans or beasts, every single part of a plant folk shared a fragment of their sentience. If detached, they would attempt to reunite with the main body or to rebuild it from scratch. Lith had no idea as well of how a Trentling body worked. Based on his previous experience with Lyda, he knew that a dryad's only vital organ was the flower they had instead of a heart. As long as it was intact, their bodies could endlessly regenerate just by absorbing nutrients from the soil. The flower could also be willingly removed as an act of submission. The dryad would have their power halved and their life would be in the hands of whoever held the flower. Chapter 802, A New Field Part 2. My guess is that Trentlings have no vitals at all. If a piece gets separated from its main body for too long, it dies due to the lack of nutrients while trying to regenerate its body. Lith said while passing the sample to Freya. Great guess, and almost correct. Marth nodded. A Trentling only vital organ are their feet, where once the roots were. It's the only way they have to absorb their nourishment. Once they had all examined it, he gave them a second crystal. This one held a sample of the same size, but its color was much more vibrant, with the brown of the bark covered in bright green streaks that made it look like a precious gemstone. This is a fragment of the skin of an infected Trentling, instead, Marth said. Really? Quilla was once again the first to receive the sample. Being an undead plague, I expected them to be rotting, gross, or at least show sign of. It was her turn of almost dropping the crystal in surprise, and only Marth's quick reflexes saved it. Be careful. Appearances can be beautiful on the outside as much as they are ugly on the inside, he said. Only when it was his turn to examine the sample did Lith understand the meaning of the professor's words. Each one of the green healthy cells had its cellulose wall surrounded by a second wall made of a gray substance that squirmed and twisted around them like a bundle of worms. The gray wall pierced both the cell walls and membrane, establishing a symbiotic relationship with it. The undead tissue was somehow able to steal a little bit of Lith's vitality even through the crystal. The gray material fed the energy to the cells, making them grow stronger and multiply at an alarming rate. Each new cell was immediately coated by tendrils of the gray substance, and the process started anew. We call it a plague only for simplicity's sake, but the truth is much more complex. This is not the work of a parasite, a fungus, or any microorganism we've studied in the past. The plague is actually made by undead tissues that somehow are capable of bonding with their host to create a symbiotic hybrid structure that can assimilate both nutrients and life force. It does no harm to its host, quite the contrary. The vibrant green streaks on the bark are due to the invigorating effect that the symbiote has on the living tissues, which allows them to reach their full potential. The infected all develop outstanding physical and magical prowess, allowing them to best their healthy peers. To make matters worse, infected have no need to feed like an undead. Sure, if the symbiote is not fed with life energy, it preys on its host. But due to plant folks' innate regenerative abilities, it only needs they need to eat more. To make matters worse, when the infected feed upon life force instead of nutrients, it gives them an intoxicating feeling that in the long term becomes addictive. If the affliction isn't so bad, why are we here? Quilla asked. Honestly, I don't understand why they even want our help. As you describe it, it seems some kind of legendary blessing with no downsides. If such a thing was possible, why no one ever did it before? Her words made Marth shook his head, sighing in frustration. What you say would be true for an individual, not a community. First, if everyone has powers, then it's as if nobody has them. Second, undead abilities consume life energy that has to be replenished, forcing the infected to eat more. There is no way for the soil to be able to sustain that kind of consumption, hence sooner or later it will cause a famine. Also, those who start feeding on their kin soon lose themselves to the feeding frenzy and kill their victims. Plant folks aren't murderers. They lack empathy because thanks to their regenerative abilities, killing them with conventional means is really hard, but everyone dies if their life force is drained. There have been countless killings since the epidemic started. Once the food starts to run out, no one could afford to remain neutral, turning a simple battle for power in an all-out war for survival that could spread outside Larule's walls. Do you have a cure already? Lith asked. Sadly, no. We have tried starving an infected patient, but they die along with the symbiote. Normal healing and darkness spells have no effect because the life force of the patients and the symbiote are linked. We have achieved partial success injecting small and constant amounts of darkness magic in an infected, resulting in a complete recovery. Unfortunately, it's not something we can use for everyone. The process is slow and excruciating, plus the starvation almost made the patient go mad. I need to see a patient, Lith said. My abilities as a diagnostician are ill-suited for small samples and lab analysis. My spells work at the best of their abilities when they are used on a full body. Marth nodded and called at their table one of his colleagues. It was a woman, wearing the uniform of the students of the White Griffin despite the fact that she was too old for that. No academy would take in as a student someone in their 30s. She was 1.75 meters, 5 feet 9 inches tall, with shoulder-length raven black hair and a lithe frame. Yet she moved slowly and clumsily as if she was afraid to destroy the expensive equipment simply by touching it. She was pretty, but her stern expression and cold blue eyes gave her an eerie aura. Lith didn't miss how she was working alone, nor that most researchers, even those from the White Griffin, seemed to be scared of her. It's nice to meet you again, Scourge. Your strength grew remarkably since your last visit. Her voice was warm, creating a deep contrast with her appearance. Kala, what are you doing here? Lith recognized her immediately from both her voice and smell. Kala nodded and gestured him to follow her. I'm the White Griffin's resident expert in necromancy, and I'm friends with Marth ever since Balkir's attack. Also, I've a personal interest in this plague. If I could create its living equivalent, I could give Nika a normal life until I find a proper cure for her condition. Is this how they dragged you in this story? Lith asked. Not really. It was Lyda asking me for help, and I accepted only to avoid more senseless deaths. As you know, undead must feed on their own living kin to thrive. Feeding on another race barely gives them sustenance. The reason why Queen Linan called humans for help is that their life essence tastes disgusting to both Erlich's followers and the infected. Being partially undead, I'm in charge of the interactions with the patients since they can't prey on my life force. I've heard that both the ruler of Larule and the pretender are evolved plants. Are they awakened? Lith enveloped them in a hush spell as soon as they were too far for the others to notice it. No, otherwise this would be a matter for the council. Unfortunately, they're just born from Fae. It gives them great power and makes them desperate for more. They know about awakening, but have no idea how to achieve it. Chapter 803 Smokescreen Part 1. As Kala talked, her body constantly shifted from a normal appearance to a skeletal figure enveloped in living shadows, very similar to what happened in her wraith form. I didn't choose this form to be pleasant to the eye, nor to make friends. She explained once she noticed Litha's surprise. It's just that being a giant bear makes it really hard to work with little things, and I can't use spirit magic in front of humans. Have you discovered anything with invigoration that we can use to develop a cure? Lith asked. Yes and no. You'll understand once you see one of the infected. Is Solus with you? Lith showed her his right hand, where a stone ring was wrapped around the cloaking device Solus had forge mastered to hide her existence. Excellent move. I couldn't even perceive her even from this close. Nice to meet you, Solus. I hope one day you'll show our human form to me as well. Kala said. Just come visit me once. Solus used air magic to speak to her friend. I've invited you to the tower more than once. I know. She sighed. My children always rebuke me for my long absences, but my research is too important. If not for the crisis at hand, I would have not left my lab. I would have never thought that you cared so much for the human world. Lith was surprised by Kala's words. I don't. You are misunderstanding my words. Undead plants are much more dangerous than normal undead. No matter if they feed on regular humans or beasts, their victims always have the opportunity to call for help or to band together to better defend themselves. In the case of undead feeding on plants, their victims are sitting ducks. Entire regions might be infested with undead, and no one would notice until it is too late. Without the green, herbivores would starve, and once they fall, everyone else will follow. The tree hosting the labs was bigger than the White Griffin Hospital, forcing the two awakened to take a walk to reach the stairs for the lower floors. Lith noticed immediately that the underground facility was made entirely of rock and enchanted with an earth-blocking array. Here we keep the patients that are willing to be cured, no matter the cost. Kala explained. Rock to prevent them to feed on the nutrients of the soil, and the array to stop them from escape with earth magic once starvation kicks in. Everything from the bare stone corridors to the thick metal doors made the place look more like a prison rather than a hospital ward. Kala led Lith to one of the cells, showing him the enchanted padlock and the sequence of runes necessary to open it. Inside, there was a Trentling, a tree who had gained sentience. Lith had no idea if plant folks had a gender or if it was just a matter of how they choose to appear, but it looked like a male to him. Even though the Trentling was curled up in a corner of his cell, hugging his knees close to his chest, he was still over 1.5 meters, 5 foot, tall. His wooden limbs were as thin as a walking cane, and the pile of leaves that covered the cell's floor once belonged to his now bald head. The bark of the Trentling was nothing like the sample Lith had seen upstairs. It was of a dull black, creaking every time the plant folk moved. The creature's eyes were two black holes lit by a fierce red light that proved how the hunger of the symbiote was consuming its host. The creature snarled at their entrance, yet he didn't move. Their stench was so disgusting that the Trentling was able to suppress his violent instincts. This is interesting, Solus thought. Metal doors and walls didn't impede her mystical senses, so she had taken a good look at all the inmates before sharing with Lith her findings. Just as I expected, this Trentling has a blood core along with his mana core. Marth's therapy works because a weakened blood core can be easily destroyed by darkness magic, but the resulting pain is inhumane. Also, for such a method to work, the body must be so weakened that it can't supply the blood core with energy anymore. I'm afraid that not even all plant folks can survive this method, let alone humans. You said this was interesting. So far the situation is just desperate. Lith replied. Let me finish. Their situation is completely different from the undead thrall we met in Other. Count Zolver had a blood core that was near his mana core, and they were both made out of his own energy. The patients here, instead, have a blood core as well, but it doesn't show any sign of attempting to merge with the mana core. What's even more unsettling is that the energy signature of the two cores doesn't match. Quite the contrary. Each infected has their own energy signature, whereas the blood cores bear the same energy signature, as if they all belong to the same person. Lith used both Invigoration and the Tier 5 spell scanner on the Trentling to double-check Solus's findings. What the heck? Lith's exams proved that she was right, except for one thing. According to Scanner, there was no such thing as two life forces, only one. After closing the cell door and hushing the zone, Lith shared with Kala everything he and Solus had found. Interesting, Kala said. My readings match yours, yet Solus's makes much more sense. During my time here, I used Invigoration to check both our patients and those who refused to be cured. No matter how much they feed, they never turned into proper undead but remained hybrids. The only ones who actually became undead are those who willingly joined Erlich's ranks. I'm sorry, but you've lost me after more sense. Lith admitted. What I'm trying to say is that the plague is actually undead tissues that bond to their victims like a parasite and then spread to the rest of their bodies. The infected are not really undead. They are simply invigorated by the parasite who shares with them both its strength and hunger. Hence, no matter if they choose to feed like undead or not, the parasite can only grow up to a certain extent without killing their hosts. They are not really hybrids so much as two different living beings almost fused together. We failed to realize it because whoever created this parasite engineered it so that the second life force would always be eclipsed by that of its host. Does this knowledge help you in finding a cure? Lith asked. No, but it's a start. At least now I know why all of my experiments so far failed. It's because they were based on the wrong assumption that the undead matter was part of the patient, while it's actually a foreign organism. Kala sighed deeply, and her whole figure turned to a shadowed skeleton for a split second. Poor Nika. She really hoped to become able to remain awake during the day. Yet if my hypothesis is right, whoever created the plague didn't make it to create hybrids, but only to use it as a ruse to push the inhabitants of Lorule on Erlich's side. And no hybrids mean that you can't apply it to your daughter. Lith completed the phrase for her. Chapter 804 Smokescreen Part 2. Exactly. Now our problem is how to share this information without revealing Solus's existence. I'm here for over 2 weeks, and I've failed to make any breakthrough, like anybody else. I can't take credit for the discovery simply because I wouldn't know how to explain it. What about you? Kala asked. I'm already too famous, and I'm not even supposed to be here. They asked for Quilla, not me. I have no plausible excuse either, nor do I want more fame. We'll have to lead the research group by the nose and make them stumble on the discovery. Kala nodded and guided him back upstairs. She pondered the revelation, in search of a way to share it or at least use it to find a cure. Erlich the Draugr Trent's headquarters, now. Even though over a century had passed since Erlich had become a Draugr, he still hated his condition's guts. If not for the fact that he would have long been dead otherwise, he would have never accepted to be turned. As all Draugr, he was a creature of greed. During the day, he was forced to remain inside his burial ground to keep watch on his possessions, even though both his body and mind were paralyzed by the presence of the sun. Even his minions were forced to speak to him through the heavy door of his apartments. Such was Erlich's fear of someone robbing him after laying their eyes on his treasures. The greed of a Draugr didn't reflect only on their sleeping habit, but also on the way they fed. Draugr weren't content on sapping their victims' vitality. They also had to rob them of something they held precious. Erlich's room was filled with trinkets of his past victims, who he had devoured whole in his envy for all the things they had and were now denied to him. His new lodgings in Lorule were filled with the earth from his original burial ground in Giera. Another part of his curse was his inability to get too far from it without his powers growing weak by the hour. What's the status of our research on bugbears, Gremlich? He asked. During the day, even speaking required sheer willpower and a control over his blood core that it had taken Erlich decades to acquire. A complete failure, Master, replied the Grendel Dryad through the door. Animals don't seem able to reach a symbiosis with your tissues. They don't obtain any power after being infected. On the contrary, the stronger your tissues grow, the weaker the infected become, until their body gets overcome by your saplings and die. What becomes of the saplings? Erlich's experiments were twofold. He wanted to check if the same method he meant to use for conquering the plant folk cities could be applied to the humans as well, and if it could overcome the undead course of being sterile. He had no desire for offspring, but if he managed to artificially spawn even Trentlings who would share part of his abilities, they would make excellent pawns. Erlich wasn't content with Lorule. His real aim was to use the city as a stepping stone to a high seat in the undead courts, and then use it to change their policy. Erlich had already lost a home due to the foolishness of humans, and he wasn't willing to see it happen twice. Humans were just dumb beasts who needed to be tamed, and he was willing to be the one putting them to the leash once and for all. They die along with their host. Gremlich replied. Some of the biggest specimens almost resembled you, but none of them managed to stabilize. There is something missing, but we have no idea of what. The problem was actually simple. Erlich had used light and darkness magic to fuse his tissues with Giera's plague, making them capable of thriving even inside a foreign body. Undeath boosted their vitality while the plague gives them the ability to fuse with living beings. Yet neither could change the fact that tissues alone couldn't create a real blood core. Once their host died, Erlich's monstrosity would follow due to the instability of its pseudo-blood core and the lack of nourishment. Unlike abominations, who were able to feed on any kind of energy, undead were very picky eaters. Monsters, or even humans provided to the Draugr such a poor meal that his saplings needed to feed on the local flora to survive. That was the reason why the bugbear's cave Freya had found was completely devoid of vegetation. Damn it, Erlich roared. Yet even though he was beyond furious, his body didn't move an inch. I've invested most of my riches in this research. If we fail to capture Lorule, I will be left with nothing. No home, no status, and even more importantly, no money. A Draugr stinginess was such that compared to them, Lith was a spendthrift. I have more bad news, sir. Gremlich stepped away from the door, just a split second before an inhuman roar made it tremble. Erlich was certain that the Grendel delivered him bad news only during the morning to be safe from his master's anger. And he was right. Erlich had a temper, but by the time the sun had set, he would have regained both his ability to move and his cool. Another awakened has arrived in Lorule today. We identified him thanks to the Night Court. He is willing to help Li Nan as well, but the silver lining is that he is a human. Erlich finally had a good laugh after so much cussing. He envied Awakened above everything. They had power, unlimited stamina, and longevity. Erlich had never forgiven his parents, whoever they were, for abandoning him, nor the Awakened he had met when he was still alive for not sharing their secret with him. He was aware that stealing the secret of awakening was out of the question, yet having the opportunity to kill not one, but two Awakened was too good to be true. Technology was an appendix of magic on Mogr, and was used only by those in the field of state-of-the-art magical research. Hence, only Quilla knew how to use the alchemical tools and Forgemaster devices to further scan the various crystal and case samples. To Freya and Floria, all that pushing buttons and turning knobs made no sense. While everyone worked, moving from one instrument to another, they were just standing dumbly while waiting for instructions. It made them feel left out and reconsider their offer for help. I think that Kala really looks good in her human form, Freya said, hoping to make some conversation to pass time. What do you mean her human form? Floria asked, receiving a grunt of agreement from Quilla, who was studying all the samples at her disposal before reading the other healers' findings about the disease. She wanted to face the problem with an open mind, without being influenced by their conclusions. Seriously? You don't know? I mean, how many Kala that call Lith Scourge do you know? Freya was shocked. She had always thought that after being together with her sister for that long, Lith would have opened up with her at least a bit. Are you saying that woman is our Kala? The bear, I mean the BYK, I mean the white. Floria asked. Yeah, Emperor beasts can shapeshift into humans. Only then did Freya remember that she was the only one to have witnessed to Litha's reunion with his old friend. Chapter 805 Empress, Gambit Part 1. By that time, he and Floria had long broken up, plus they hadn't talked to each other until Journey's last birthday. Floria had no way to know, and Freya had completely forgotten that shapeshifting was supposed to be kept a secret. Probably. Freya corrected herself in time. Headmaster, Quilla asked. Your sister is right. Marth said. It's rare, but some Emperor beasts can change their appearance. I asked for Kala's help because the White Griffin lacks a necromancy expert, and even though she is young, she runs circles around even the professors of the Black Griffin. Everyone in this room knows, since it's common knowledge among the upper echelons of all the three great countries. But it's a major secret among the general population, so keep it for yourself. Marth didn't like the idea of sharing state secrets with children, but Kala was still very clumsy, both physically and socially. It was only a matter of time before they found out anyway. Neither Lith nor Freya were surprised. I must report to the kingdom how deep the bond of those two with the Emperor beasts is. Marth thought. Humans with a good relationship with beasts were even rarer than shapeshifters, or so he thought. All countries were looking for ambassadors capable of talking Emperor beasts into sharing their secrets. I need a drink. Floria sunk into the nearest chair, quickly followed by Quilla. Freya kept biting her tongue to not share Protector's secret in front of the headmaster, nor to laugh about how similar her sister's reaction was to her own. Kala, is that you? Quilla asked once the two awakened returned. She had never talked much with the White, but she had cried a lot during Balkir's attack, when she had thought that both Kala and Protector had died to save the White Griffin students. Who else could I be, little one? Kala replied, while making her flesh turn into darkness and revealing a glimpse of her human skull. Damn it, Kala. Marth said in frustration. Why do you keep doing that? I told you to keep your identity a secret for the good of both the kingdom and your own. Most researchers refuse to work with you because you scare them with your shenanigans. They refuse to work with me because they are close-minded cowards. Kala's voice was calm and soft, yet echoed throughout the lab, making more than one healer flinch. This is not a shenanigan. She pointed at the half of her body covered in darkness, while the other half was still flesh and blood. This is who I am. What a white would look like if they were born human instead that as a BYK. I've no reason to be ashamed of my origins, nor I'm here to coddle their prejudices about Mogar. If my presence is unwanted, I'll gladly leave. Well said. It's them who should be ashamed of their childish behavior. A strong, feminine voice said, accompanied by the sound of clapping hands. Milea Janice, the magic empress of the Gorgon Empire, stepped forward with her hand extended towards the white, who promptly shook it. She was a 1.75 meters, 5 feet 9 inches, tall woman, with long wavy honey-hued hair, who looked like to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing the ample, deep blue mage robe of the healers from the Empire, making her indistinguishable from her colleagues. Her blue eyes lingered on the anomaly a second longer than she would have liked, but curiosity got the better of her. Milea didn't expect to meet Lith in person so soon, and had no idea how to introduce herself without sounding creepy. Kala had given her the perfect opportunity, and she seized it. On behalf of the Gorgon Empire, I apologize for my mage's rudeness. I'm always looking for competent allies, so if the kingdom lets you down, my door will always be open. Milea was still the only awakened the Empire could rely on. Unlike the kingdom, Ligane refused to produce fake awakened, and she had yet to find someone she trusted enough to share her gift. Thanks to her relationship with the Dragon Guardian, Emperor Beasts had a favorable opinion of her, yet they refused to follow her political ambitions. She deeply longed for someone capable of understanding her burden. Power and isolation didn't corrupt her, but they were still eating at her from the inside. The fact that the council refused any contact with Milea, considering her to be nothing more than an appendix of Ligane, only worsened her loneliness. There was not a single awakened member of all the races that didn't resent her for her luck. She was barely past her 30s, yet Milea already had a purple core and a mastery over all branches of magic that would take decades to obtain, even to a genius. Over time, the gap between her and the centuries-old elders of the council was only getting thinner, which made their resentment grow stronger. My dear students, allow me to introduce you to Milea Janice, also known as the Magic Empress. Your Highness, these are Freya, Quilla, and Floria Ernest. Also, this is Kala the White and Lith Furhen. The girls were so shocked that they needed Marth's help to stand up from their chairs. The woman in front of them looked barely older than them, and yet was the ruler of one of the kingdom's greatest rivals. If not for having met Faluel just a few days before, Lith would have been in the same situation, even though for completely different reasons. By my maker, this woman has the brightest purple core I have ever seen, and her physical prowess matches Faluel's. On top of that, she is an awakened with a monstrous mana flow. Solus said, shaking in her mind boots. Are you here to help as well? Lith asked while giving Milea a deep bow and avoiding her extended hand. Invigoration was the only thing that could spot Solus. I thought you were too busy with the Lich. I still am. Milea sighed. I came just to check on the progress and to see if I can provide some insight. I was the one who found a cure to Giera's plague, and this undead outbreak is clearly just a variation of it. She had actually just helped Ligane, but she had been forced to take all the credit since he demanded for his existence to be kept a secret. It's not an undead outbreak, it was just staged to look like one. Kala said. Lith had told her that he didn't want to be credited with the discovery, and it would give her the opportunity to humble all those jerks that giggled every time she broke something due to not being used to such a flimsy body. Two birds with one stone. Kala shared with those present Solus's analysis and her own theory about how the undead tissues worked. To explain everything, she just pretended that she had developed a powerful diagnostic spell. This is an amazing piece of news, dear Kala. Milea's eyes sparkled like stars. It gives us a completely safe route to save Larul from this pinch. Which is? Kala asked, expressing the curiosity of everyone. Solus's discovery was important because it allowed the research team to realize their mistake and pointed them in the right direction, but at the same time, it made the matter much more complicated. Chapter 806 Empress, Gambit Part 2. There was no telling how to cure a sentient disease, nor a way to separate host and symbiote safely. Unlike others' situation, there was no vortex messing with the healer's mana, but the entity didn't reside in a specific part of their victim's body. It was so widely spread that removing it surgically like Manohar did with Thrud's meat puppets was impossible. Isn't it obvious? The source of the disease is a plant, and undead or not, Fae don't leave a body behind. Hence, if we found the one whose tissues were used and kill them, all of our problems will be solved. Milea said. Another possible option is to identify the undead who spawned the parasite. It will not only help us to narrow our search, but it could also help us in finding a way to neutralize the affliction. Aside from liches, all the undead have several weak points. This isn't a disease so much as a living being, which means that it must share the flaws of its creator. Marth said. Such was the mix of embarrassment and enthusiasm in the room that no one stopped to wonder how odd the timing of Kala's discovery was. Milea had her suspicions, but she would not betray a fellow awakened. She focused on making sure that even if the issue was lingering in someone's head, it would go unnoticed. She harshly reprimanded the Empire's research team and changed their leader as a punishment. The woman's skills were top-notch, and Milea couldn't blame her for missing the two different energy signatures, since even Milea's own invigoration had failed her. Yet the Empress demoted the team leader anyway because her short sightedness could make the Empire lose precious allies in the future. Dear Kala, the Empire would be honored to become the home of a talented individual like yourself. Humans, beasts, undead, or anything in between, I give you my word that I don't discriminate, she said while stealing a glance at Lith to see if he had any reaction. Unfortunately for her, his poker face was carved out of stone. Kala gave her a polite bow. I'll think about it. Does your invitation extend to my children as well? As long as they abide by our laws, yes. Their exchange made Marth shudder. Emperor beasts like Faluel had been powerful assets of the kingdom for centuries. Even though she was young, Kala had already proved to be resourceful. As headmaster of the White Griffin, losing her to the enemy would be considered Marth's fault. The same applies to you, Lady Ernest. Milea grabbed Floria's hand before she could react, emphasizing the loss of her military title. I've heard of your troubles, and I'd be glad to offer you a position in the Empire's military. Our soldiers don't risk to be victims of political plays because there are none. Thanks, but no. Floria replied without a second of hesitation. My family has lived and served the Griffin Kingdom for generations. I'm not going to betray my household and my country as an act of petty revenge. As you wish. Milea didn't insist. The bait had been cast. Now it was only a matter of waiting and seeing how appealing the kingdom's foolishness would make it. Ranger Verhen, I've heard of your troubles with runesmithing. Litha's poker face crumbled, and so did Marth's patience. The Empress knowing about a conversation he had only had with Orion was beyond disturbing. Are you here to help Larul with the disease, or to scout talents? Marth stood between the Empress and his alumni. I'm here to protect the interests of the Gorgon Empire. She replied with a sly smile. Now I'm really sorry, but I have to go. That damn lich has been spotted, and I can't afford to miss this opportunity. I wish you the best of luck. Milea walked away, reproaching her research team one last time before disappearing through a warp gate she conjured out of nowhere. Since when a dimensional mage can create a gate? Freya asked. It was her favorite specialization, yet she wasn't able to open a dimensional tunnel under normal circumstances, let alone bypassing all Larul's array. A dimensional mage can't, but the Empress can. Marth gritted his teeth in frustration, yet he didn't belittle the enemy's feat. Milea posed a great threat to the kingdom, but at the same time, they had much to learn from her. In the Empire, there were already several cities where humans and beasts coexisted peacefully. Even though Emperor beasts weren't part of their regular army, they still willingly patrolled the Empire's borders and their wilds, sometimes even creating settlements. It was something that the kingdom could only dream about since most of its citizens had a hard time considering even hydras as more than huge animals. You have much to do, and I don't intend to slow you down. Kala moved toward the lab's exit, gesturing Lith to follow her. What do you mean? Marth asked, finally understanding how Linjos must have felt every time the queen threatened to behead him. The responsibilities that the role of headmaster implied, especially after Balkir's attack had destroyed the hold that the ancient households had on the academies, were overwhelming. After being rebuilt, both the Crystal and Earth Griffin had already changed several headmasters due to their incompetence in dealing with their students or the lords of the forest. The Queen didn't hesitate to replace anyone she found wanting, and Marth felt like he was about to become one of them. Cala's voice was oozing with spite. Rather than waste my time learning how to use all of these instruments, now that I have a solid lead, I mean to follow it. My spell will allow me to recognize the energy signature we are looking for, or at least to spot an undead that fits the bill. I'm not foolish enough to go alone. I need protection, and Lith is the only one I trust among you. Cala wasn't really angry. She needed an excuse to bring him along since without Solus, she would be just taking a stroll. If it's protection you need, I'd be glad to assist you. Floria said, I'm afraid that my talents as a healer are not enough to be of help here. Me too, Freya said. She had come to make sure that Quilla was safe, but after seeing how sturdy the building was and recognizing some of the most famous mages from all the 3 great countries, she was feeling utterly useless. Also, she couldn't miss the opportunity to tour a foreign city filled with plant folk marvels. Just because her vacation was ruined, it didn't mean that she couldn't enjoy the beauty of Lorule. Until that day, the only plant folk she had ever met was Lyda. Cala looked at Lith for a second, waiting for his nod before replying. Fine by me. Lyda, we need a guide. Cala said. This is really a bad idea. The Dryad said. You must understand that there are only 2 kinds of plant folk. Those like us Dryads, who love humans because we consider evolution as a path that leads all races toward the same destination, and those who hate humans and beasts alike because they still hold a grudge. They still remember how it feels to be stepped over, to see your kin being ripped off the ground just to play a tune, or being treated as a disposable gift. It pains me to say that our cities are a dangerous place. Chapter 807 Lorule Part 1. You would be at risk of being attacked even without the current struggle for power, but as it is now, you might as well walk with a target on your back. Lyda said. Between plant folk resenting humans, the infected starving due to the parasite, and Erlich's followers disguised among the crowd, being leaned-in guests of honor might not be enough to ensure your safety. Lyda was many things, but rude to her friends wasn't one of them. She was politely trying to warn Cala that once again her nature could bring her a lot of trouble. Erlich was bound to consider her a traitor, whereas plant folks would only see her undead half and consider Cala either an enemy or a plague spreader. Thanks for your concern, but I'll take my chances. Cala reverted to her full white form. It was a mass of shadows as big as a small house, which kept shape-shifting until it resembled a bear. Its only distinctive features were its glowing red eyes and its massive skeleton that glimpsed from time to time underneath the ever-changing darkness composing Cala's body. Where do you want to go? Lyda asked, wondering why so many people only looked at her friend's eerie appearance and were incapable of seeing her loving character. Despite the fact that all Dryads had a stunning appearance, it wasn't a matter of them being vain, nor an attempt to please the human's eye. Just like what happened for the first form Emperor beasts learned to shapeshift into, when a flower evolved into a Dryad, they simply would take the physical appearance they envisioned themselves with. I'm not going to sightsee, so lead us to the last known position of Erlich's headquarters. Cala replied, if the tissues that create the disease are made out of his body, it would be just perfect. We'll even have a good reason to participate in the power struggle, even though the plant folk law requires only for the citizen of the city-state to be able to take part in it. But that would be dangerous. Lyda said, they have probably moved from the last raid, but if they see you, they'll try to take you down. What's the point in me staying here? It's better if Erlich's followers find me. At least they will give me something to study. Cala replied with a wolfish smile. Ever since Lith and Solus had taught her light magic, her research to achieve lichhood had progressed by leaps and bounds. Cala wasn't as skilled as Scarlet in the use of light magic, nor she could turn darkness into light at will, but she was slowly understanding how deep the bond between the 2 seemingly conflicting elements was. If she managed to capture a few undead, she would be able to study their blood cores without the act of playing God with their very life essence troubling her conscience. Cala was gentle, but not stupid. She had buried all her past opponents, and once she resolved to kill someone, The how and how long would it take were just meaningless details. One last thing. Can we use dimensional magic inside Larul? Kala asked. In a city full of potential dangers, it would have been foolish to move without having a clear retreat path. Technically, no. The arrays are set up so that only plant folks can use both the public transportation system and dimensional items. However, you are lean-in guests, and that grants you special privileges. Lyda gave to each one of them what looked like a small acorn. Channel your mana through this focus, and your spells will work as usual. Be careful, because even dimensional amulets are sealed to foreigners. The moment the two awakened held their respective acorn, they could feel the power residing within with invigoration. It wasn't a magical device, but a still living piece of something bigger. It had no mana core, yet both its life force and mana flow were visible. Fucking great. Lith thought. This is the best bug one could possibly devise. Whoever spawned this seemingly harmless acorn could be listening and watching whatever we are doing, maybe even scanning our mana. On top of that, I can't store it inside my pocket dimension because I need the acorn to use my dimensional storage. It's a perfect catch-22. Do you think it could sense me? Solus asked. Unlikely, but I'm not going to take risks. The group practiced a bit how to open and close dimensional doors through the acorns before leaving. Kala stored her own inside a small utility belt she wore around her neck. Then, Lyda opened a gate leading to their destination and wished them good luck. Even though the awakened were pissed off at the subtle attempt to spy on them, even if all the members of the group were tense at the idea of stepping inside the lion's den, the spectacle in front of their eyes was breathtaking. The sun was up from a few hours, but somehow there was still dew on the leaves of the tall trees that covered the sky above Larul like a ceiling, preventing the city from being spotted by any flying onlooker. The dew reflected the sunlight, so that even though the thick foliage made it impossible to look at the sky, the city was perfectly lit. The dew also created several small rainbows that moved along with the group's gazes, giving Larul an appearance worthy of a fairy tale. Its buildings weren't carved or built, so much as grown, making each city block no different from a patch of trees. Some houses were close to each other, while others were afar, as if whoever planted them had acted on a whim. Yet there was harmony and beauty at every corner. Larul didn't feel like a city, so much as a natural treasure that extended as far as the eye could see. The fresh air was filled with long-forgotten scents that rejuvenated their lungs. The vibrant colors of the flowers that grew almost everywhere soothed their restless spirit, and the vision of the magical inhabitants of the city, with their oddly shaped, yet beautiful bodies, almost made the group forget about the importance of their mission. Almost. Even Lith found it hard to not stop and smell the roses. But the fairy tale turned grim if one bothered to look past the surface of things. Several anomalies alerted his senses. The lack of all the characteristic smells of a city allowed him to perceive that something was wrong. Beneath the fragrant scent of flowers, the air reeked with decay. The buildings where Erlich and his followers had hidden were revealed by patches of withered green. The signs of the struggle that ensued after they had been found by Lianon's guards were still visible. Only the houses tainted by the touch of the undead had yet to recover, whereas the rest of the neighborhood was in pristine condition. Solus scanned their surroundings, reassuring Lith that somehow, the living tree houses hadn't been affected by the blight, but the same couldn't be told about the citizens of Larul. She identified several plant folks with a blood core, and that made her think. Kala, does reflected light count against undead? Lith asked on Solus's behalf. Yes. The massive amount of light energy it bears has negative effects on many species of undead. We already know that the infective tissues do not have an adverse reaction to sunlight. Chapter 808 Larul Part 2. Their victims retain their physical strength during the day, so we can already rule out all the undead that would be harmed by exposure to the sun. Sadly, it doesn't narrow the research enough. Even if they belong to an undead who is paralyzed during the day, we have no idea how Giera's plague altered its metabolism. Maybe the tissues are still, but the organisms carrying them are not undead and allow the infection to spread even during the day. Kala said. Then what are we doing here? Freya asked. Wouldn't it be better to get back at night, when all kinds of undead can freely move around? We're doing research, child. If we find out that no undead matching the energy signature we are looking for is outside during the day, it means that they probably can't move. Also, this is the perfect time to look for Erlich. Draugr can't move as long as the sun is up, no matter if it's covered by clouds or leaves. If we find him, he can't escape. What makes you think that we can succeed where even Leannon's network of spies and constables failed? Floria asked. Plants folks are too obsessed with power to mind the small details, while you humans are helpless without your toys. Us beasts are natural hunters, and hybrids like me have many aces up their sleeves. Calla grinned, winking at Lith, who would have loved to share her optimism. Sure, they had life vision, something that non-awakened could only dream of, but the magical aura of the place was overwhelming to the point that even Solas's mana sense was foggy at best. They needed to get really close to a treehouse to see past its shrouding, and with all the sweet scents lingering in the air, Lith's nose was already jammed. Yet Calla was right. Among the plant folks, there were undead spying on them. Sorry, I don't recognize their energy signature, which means none of them is the one who spawned the disease, nor do they belong to the same undead kin. Solas said. They had already put all the books about undead they had inside Solaspedia after their first squabble with the famished creatures in the Radhar forest, but that didn't allow Solas to recognize an unknown type of greater undead just by looking at their blood core. Lith had met very few undead in the past, like liches, a banshee, and a couple of vampires. Whatever the things watching at them were, he had no clue what they were capable of. While Lith and Calla looked carefully around themselves, with their eyes glowing because of life vision, Floria focused on the details of the scenery and the crowd, looking for anything out of place. The first thing she noticed was that she wouldn't expect more hostility from the locals even if they were there to conquer the city rather than save it. She was wearing her acorn on her chest, as if it was a badge, yet the glares she received were spiteful at best. The second thing she noticed was the absence of children. It wasn't just that. Except for those watching at the group from behind their windows and those loitering, the streets looked deserted. Floria couldn't hear a child cry, laugh, or any noise related to the presence of someone who wasn't an adult. She had studied plant folks at the academy, but she had never met many of them before. Trentlings were humanoids who looked like trees, with bark instead of skin, leaves instead of hair on their head, and both had different shades of colors just like it happened for human hair. Their height varied, but none of them was shorter than 2 meters, 6 feet, 7 inches. Each one of them exhibited a different build and numbers of limbs. Some Trentlings were thin, with arms not thicker than a human's, while others were big enough that it was easy to mistake them for a real tree if they stayed still with their eyes closed. Most of them walked on 2 legs, but they were able to grow extra limbs whenever they needed, just to reabsorb them once they were no longer necessary. Thorns, the plant folks born from bushes, were nothing like the creatures she had met back in Kulla. Some had a human appearance, like the vegetation that the gardener of her household trimmed to give it the semblance of a mythical creature or of a hero of the past. Others looked more like beasts, standing on all 4 and seemingly sniffing the air like hunting dogs. Their shape, size, and even color varied greatly from an individual to another, but she soon noticed that their form was merely dependent on their choice. Thorns could assume any appearance they wanted, as long as the final mass didn't exceed their own. They could actually grow as big as they wanted and obtain a greater strength, but doing that required them to spend huge amounts of stamina and mana. Calla, why no one is attacking the undead? I thought that plant folks hated them. Freya asked while nodding at a few red-eyed creatures among more than one group of bystanders. Because those are not undead. Calla said. The red you see is the same that graces Floria's hair. It's the sign of the blessing of the gods of magic. Not all plants have leaves, but all of them need eyes to see. The red light of undeath is much colder than that, and is only visible if the creature has no longer eyes, just like me. Wait, thorns, dryads, and trentlings all have leaves. Lith said, what kind of plants are you talking about? Those who grow and live underground. You might not meet them often, even in the wilds, but here is different. Larul is their city, so they are not afraid of mingling with their cousins. Calla pointed with her snout at a creature that at first glance looked like a mass of mold infesting a tree. Only when it moved did Lith realize it was actually a living mass of moss. It snarled at Calla's gesture, staring at her with its blue and yellow eyes. Calla returned the glare, flaring her eyes with mana to cover her use of life vision while looking at the plant folks. She identified several undead and discreetly pointed them out to Lith, but he shook his head every time. This is interesting, Calla said while they approached the almost withered treehouse that was Erlich's last known base of operations. The rate of infected in the neighborhood is very low, whereas the number of undead is high. My guess is that Erlich wanted to keep a low profile, so that his followers could feed and pin the blame for their victims on the infected. Now that she knew how the plague worked, Calla could use her mystical and physical senses to recognize the infected plant folks without the need of a diagnostic spell. Your kind has already done enough damage to our city, a Trentling said while standing in their path. Despite their huge size, they moved nimbly. The creature had covered dozens of meters with just a few steps. We don't need nor want your help. Get out of here before we make you. It was speaking to Calla, but Lith stepped in front of her, facing the Trentling. It was way taller than Lith, almost 2.5, 8 feet 2 inches, meters tall, with light brown bark and few yellow leaves with shades of black. Chapter 809 Grendel Part 1. Calla, my friend, you spoke too soon, Lith said with a smirk. Now this is what I call interesting. No one dared to stop us until we almost reached our destination. Either Erlich has gone insane, or he is afraid that we might discover something. Otherwise his goon would never bother us. Most of the bystanders plant folks who were grinning at the idea of turning the unwanted guests into fertilizer flinched at those words. Their amused expressions were replaced by anger and suspicion as their gazes moved from the humans to Ilum the Trentling. Shameless mammal, you are the one who associates himself with an undead. How dare you accuse me of being one of them? The Trentling's outrage and words were enough to shift the tide in his favor again. Ilum tried to push Lith back, but the small human kept his relaxed stance, as if the steel-beam-thick arms of the Trentling were just a gentle spring rain hitting a mountain. How? Easy enough. Your skin, bark, or whatever you call it, shows signs of withering, and so do your leaves. Yet even famished infected display an enhanced physique, hence you're not one of them. Plus, you can't be an undead either. If you were one of them, it would take days of starvation to reduce you to such a state. With such a hunger, you wouldn't be able to restrain yourself in front of so much food. Do you know what does this mean? Lith asked. That you are accusing an innocent to cover your friend's ass. A thorn said. Judging from her forms and voice, she was supposed to be a female, or at least she wanted to appear as such. Her whole body was a mass of vines and foliage that resembled a woman as tall as Floria, with blue hair and eyes. She was quivering in indignation, making her humanoid appearance falter from time to time. He's probably a victim of some undead scum. They must have fed upon him just like they did on me and my siblings. Many of us died to sate your bellies. She pointed her finger at Calla. And yet you perfectly recovered, like all plants folk do. Lith's voice was calm. He had dealt with more victims and angry mobs than he liked to. Yet it had taught him how to manipulate their fury. Of course I. The thorn stopped the moment she realized Lith's words. She placed one of her hands on the Trentling, making her vines seep under his bark. You're right. He's not an undead, nor an infected. Yet his life force is impure, she said while taking several steps back, while her form shape-shifted into her battle form, resembling a green wave of barbed vines. Of course it's impure. He's a thrall, and a powerful one at that. Lith said. The only question is who sired him. A thrall was a living creature in the process of being turned into an undead. To make it happen, the sire had to feed upon the thrall, and the thrall upon the sire. The exchange of life force allowed the blood core to form and slowly grow in power without it being rejected by the body, while the mana core became weaker. At the end of the process, the mana core would be swallowed by the blood core, allowing the thrall to become an undead without losing any of their memories, since they would never be completely dead. They would turn from living into undead. Lith had been able to recognize the Trentling for what he really was only thanks to Solus. Her mana sense allowed her to see the Trentling's twin cores that were just a few centimeters away from each other. They both had the same energy signature, which meant the creature wasn't an infected, just like the presence of the mana core was proof of the Trentling being alive. The Trentling's blood core filled to the brim with the energy of his sire was also proof that he wasn't just a pet, but a precious asset. Once again, Lith's Sherlock acting left his audience flabbergasted, yet to not give away Solus's existence, he had to reveal his trick. The next time, don't shove away a healer. Most of our spells need physical contact to work, you know, he said. The Trentling snarled at the crowd ready to lynch him, emitting sounds that no living being was supposed to. He shape-shifted his arm into a wooden spear as thick as a tree and as fast as an arrow, aiming at Lith's heart. If he dodged, the spear would impale the wight that was currently blinded by her own companion, making the sucker punch a sure kill attack. The only variable was its victim. Or so Ilum thought. Lith's left hand pushed the spear down so that it harmlessly sunk into the ground while his right hand formed a fist infused with darkness magic, hitting the paralyzed Trentling where his heart was supposed to be. The left side of Ilum's body shattered as Lith's fist pierced through the wood and opened a hole so big that the thrall's left arm was now hanging by a thread. The creature yelped in pain and surprise. Not even his sire had ever hit him so hard. Yet even a damage of that entity was just a mere inconvenience for a plant folk. The stumpy legs of the Trentling sprouted roots that penetrated the soil, extracting all the nutrients he needed to mend his body. Countless small wood tendrils collected the shattered pieces from the ground, and in the blink of an eye, it was as if nothing had happened. Much to Floria's and Solus's surprise, Lith had remained still the entire time, yet they trusted him enough to not ask questions and played along. Do you care to explain how come you just healed such a big wound, even though it was made with darkness magic without a scratch, yet your bark and leaves still look like you're about to die? Lith asked. The Trentling ignored the human and focused on the other plant folks who were approaching him with a dangerous look on their faces. Lith remained still, checking the reaction of the undead who pretended to be bystanders. He didn't think that Erlich could have been so stupid to leave something important in his hideout, nor that Lianon's guards were so incompetent that they would miss any relevant clue after forcing their enemy to escape. Yet that unwarranted provocation had to be part of a bigger scheme. A thrall wouldn't move without their sire's permission, nor would they make such a clumsy attempt to kill them. It had to be a diversion. The question was, to cover what? After noticing the Trentling's attempt to rile up the crowd, Lith had decided to use it to his own advantage. If the undead wanted a diversion, they had got it, but he was free to mess up with whatever their plan was. What he hadn't predicted was the savage fury that the plant folks demonstrated the moment they realized who their real enemy was. Trentlings, dryads, thorns, and even the moss creatures surrounded the thrall after shape-shifting into their combat form. They ripped him apart so fast and with such fury that even though Ilum's roots were still planted in the ground, his regenerative abilities weren't capable of keeping up with them. Yet no one stepped forward to help him. Chapter 8-10 Grendel Part 2. Either their plan is so important that they can afford to sacrifice him, or the undead know that such attacks can't kill the thrall. Lith thought, while taking his acorn out of the ceiling box he had stored it into. Undead couldn't use dimensional magic inside Lorule, but thralls could, and he had no idea if there were others in the crowd, if not even disguised among the angry mob. What happened next took him by surprise. The thrall roared, emitting a pulse of darkness magic that combined with the raw strength of his shape-shifting body was enough to ward off his attackers. The leaves and bark had disappeared, replaced by a dirty brown thick fur that covered the entirety of what had been a Trentling just a second before. The creature in front of them had a round head, with feral eyes as big as a saucer. It had bright red irises and vertical pupils that looked at the crowd with a mix of hate and spite. Its maw was lipless and so big that it took all the lower half of his head. The mouth was filled with sharp, long fangs, each one about 10 centimeters, 4 inch, long. All the damages the thrall had sustained were gone, and his arms were now even more muscular than before, ending with razor-sharp claws. By the Great Mother, the spawn of a Grendel is not something plant folks can take. If we get surrounded, prepare to run, Calla said while preparing for the fight. The thrall of a Grendel alone was already a tough opponent, but she was even more worried about what the other undead would do. The plant folks did their worst, but air, water, and earth magic just bounced harmlessly on the creature's fur, nor any of their attacks left so much as a scratch on him. The thrall laughed his heart out, and then began to literally mow down his opponents, cutting through wood, vines, and flesh as if they were just papier-mâché. What's a Grendel? Freya asked while unsheathing her weapon, quickly followed by Lith and Floria. A very rare and dangerous undead. They are nigh invulnerable due to their iron skin. Neither magic nor blades can usually harm them. Their only weaknesses are darkness magic and blunt weapons. What's the catch? Lith asked. Grendels were considered barely more than a myth, and the information about them in the bestiaries stored inside Solaspedia was centuries old. He trusted Kala more than a collection of hearsay. Also, there had to be a reason he had never heard about them. If Grendels were that strong, they wouldn't have gone almost extinct. They can't stand sunlight, can't use any magic outside of the darkness element, and they can't heal. A Grendel can only replace their wounded parts with healthy ones taken from their victims. Kala's reply was cut short by the thrall appearing in front of Lith with lightning-fast movements. Even though Lith was already infused with all the elements, the creature was so quick that his claws managed to get past Lith's guard and aim at his heart. Kala had no time to warn them that Grendels made up for their magical shortcomings with a physical prowess that rivaled that of veteran Emperor beasts. Yet the thing in front of them was just a thrall, not a real Grendel. The powerful blood core the Trentling's sire had gifted him with allowed Ilum to borrow the form of a Grendel and some of its abilities, but that was it. Otherwise, being out during the day would have been fatal for him, nor the Trentling would have healed so easily from Lith's previous attack. Lith sidestepped the lunge and struck at the extended arm after infusing Ruin with as much darkness magic as he could. The thick fur covering the arm sizzled and burned as the chaotic energies turned it pitch black, but neither the spell nor the blade nicked the underlying flesh. The impact sent waves through the blade and Lith's arms, making him feel as if he had struck a rock. What the heck? If this is the durability of a thrall, how though is a real Grendel? Lith thought while circling around the creature and forcing him to turn his back on the rest of the group. The thrall surprised Lith once again, simply ignoring him and continuing to charge forward. The creature extended his left arm toward Kala's head in another sudden attack. His claws pierced through the thin layer of darkness protecting her physical form, clutching her skull and ripping it off her spine before any of her allies could react. This is going to leave a mark, the skull said while still trapped in the clutches of the thrall. The creature tried to get rid of the undying monster and throw the bare skull away, but it melted in his hand and revealed its real nature. While Lith stood in front of her, Kala had swapped places with her own shadow, giving it shape and substance by manipulating the darkness and light elements. What the creature had attacked was a huge mass of energy that had now marked him as its target. The thrall shrieked as the darkness element seeped into his arm, eating away both the Trentling and the blood core empowering him. Wow, it's the first time that someone ignores me. Let's thank him properly. Lith struck at the creature with his gravity-infused blade multiple times, making the thrall's weight increase tenfold each time Ruin hit its mark. Not even that managed to leave a scratch, but the sudden gravity variations threw the creature off balance, making it impossible for him to dodge the dark mass shaped as Kala's body that was charging at him. The thrall was more than strong enough to escape from the gravity pull, but when he attempted to dodge the living projectile, Lith removed the extra weight. The sidestep was performed with too much momentum, so the Grendel crashed against the nearest treehouse, forcing him to a halt. The dark mass struck first, immediately followed by Floria's and Freya's swords, both aimed at the open maw of the creature who was screaming due to the pain it felt. Darkness magic was corroding both the Trentling and the blood core, fueling his transformation, greatly reducing the protection that the Grendel's life essence coursing through his body offered. The blades only met soft tissues, piercing their way until they hit the skull and releasing their enchantments the moment they failed to penetrate the bone. The thrall started to spat out huge amounts of black and green blood from the gaping wound in his mouth. A Trentling would have easily mended the damage, but the transformation did more than just enhancing his physical abilities. It also carried the curse of the Grendel, slowing his healing abilities so much that they were useless. Revert to your plant form, and I'll call back the darkness energy. You have a lot of explaining to do, Kala said, triggering the reaction of a couple of undead hidden amid the crowd. They had been waiting the whole time for an opening, but neither Kala nor Lith had let them out of their sight, and with dimensional magic sealed, the undead's options were limited. Now their situation had just gotten from bad to worse. If Ilum fell into enemy hands, their master plan would be ruined. The only thing they could do was either rescue him or make sure that he wouldn't talk. Chapter 8:11 Larule's Secret Part 1. They were both undead thorns, their bodies so vaguely shaped that they looked like green mannequins. Lith didn't recognize their energy signature, hence he had no idea of what kind of undead they were nor what kind of abilities they possessed. He blinked behind their backs, cutting them in half with a single slash before setting them ablaze with the black flames of his Tier 5 spell, Setting Sunday. The undead cussed out loud, revealing to be a male and a female. They unleashed respectively a chasing lightning and a powerful pulse of darkness magic. The first spell forced Lith on the defensive, while the other dispelled enough of the black flames that by sacrificing their lower halves the undead managed to escape by burrowing through the ground. There was no way of dodging chasing lightning. Lith could only conjure a stone wall and block the spell. It took him just a second, yet it was more than enough to make it impossible for him to chase the two undead. Meanwhile, Ilum was aware of the gravity of his situation, but no matter what he did, he couldn't manage to escape from the encirclement. Kala had generated several shadow copies of herself that had Ilum completely surrounded. To make matters worse, they were all casting darkness spells non-stop, making it impossible to distinguish the copies from the original. Attacking the wrong white would have meant triggering the attack of another mass of darkness magic. Kala's first attack was wearing down his transformation. His flesh was slowly turning back into bark as his brown fur withered and fell. Moreover, Floria kept conjuring stone constructs that restricted both his field of vision and movements, allowing the white spells to hit him with increasing frequency despite their slowness. Freya, instead, kept appearing in his blind spot, hitting him with pulses of darkness just to disappear the moment he turned around. Damn it, this was supposed to be a simple job. The plan was to blend in with the crowd and have the awakened attacked by an angry mob, so that in the ensuing chaos we could easily kill them. Master Gremlick sent me because not even awakened are able to recognize a thrall from a normal living being. Yet that bastard blew my cover in an instant. Time to get out of here. Ilum thought, gambling everything on the strength his sire had bestowed upon him. Even though as a plant folk Ilum was capable of using dimensional magic, the Grendel form prevented him from casting spells. The fight had begun just a few seconds before, yet he had already witnessed how powerless his Trentling form was. His only chance to escape was to break through the enemy defenses, but he couldn't just run away. His reinforcements had just been defeated, so there wasn't much time left before Lith returned, forcing Ilum to fight alone versus 4. I just need to injure one of them. It doesn't matter who. That way, I'll get rid of 2 enemies at once, since the healer will not be able to chase me as well. I'm sure that I can beat even these monsters if we fight one-on-one. Ilum thought. Kala was hidden among her shadows. Freya always retreated behind the wall of whites, so his choice fell on Floria. The annoying woman had foiled all of his previous strategies by moving one of her stone shields in his path at the worst possible moment. The thrall charged at her, while dodging Kala's darkness bullets too fast for even Freya's dimensional magic to lock on him. Floria didn't flinch, simply raising the only tower shield she had kept for herself while preparing for her riposte. Normally, Ilum would have laughed at her bravado, but he was aware that mage knights could express their full potential only in close quarters. With his life on the line, he forgot his pride as a plant folk and as a future ruler of the night, facing her like a peer instead of a bag of flesh full of nectar. Ilum pushed his speed to the utmost limit, circling around the protection of the conjured shield to avoid surprises, just to discover that Floria's skill allowed her to keep up with him. Cursing his bad luck, the thrall lunged forward with all of his might. His left arm easily pierced through the shield and the soft flesh it was protecting. Ilum clenched his fist to crush her organs and to make sure that the injury would put her in critical condition. Yet the moment the attack landed, he found himself drowning in his own blood. His left arm was cut in half at the elbow level, and the other half was still wriggling out of his own back, whereas the human was unscathed. Floria had hidden a dimensional door behind her tower shield, so that when the enemy had been foolish enough to attempt a frontal assault, she was ready. A Grendel's claws were sharp enough to pierce a Grendel's skin, allowing her to turn the enemy's strength into a weakness. Floria had also dispelled the dimensional door the moment her shield had collapsed, to not give the enemy the time to pull his arm back and try again. The bleeding stump and the hole in the chest of the thrall were too much for his already battered body. The shock from the massive damage taken and the darkness energy ravaging Ilum's body killed him on the spot. That was insane. Freya couldn't believe her own eyes. She prided herself of being one of the few dimensional mages, a title belonging only to those who had stepped up a simple means of instant transportation into a battle technique. Yet not even Freya would have dared to try such a thing. Opening a dimensional door from so close, it's too dangerous. Locking the coordinates of its entry and exit point takes time, plus you couldn't know the angle the attack would come from. You could have gotten yourself ripped into shreds. You're only partially right, Floria said while checking that there were no more enemies. I would have never managed to pull it off if I were fighting one-on-one, but I'm a mage knight, and I rarely battle alone. The hardest thing was to not move from the spot, so that the entry point was always the same and I had only to adjust the exit point. Freya still had many things to say about the craziness of such a move, and so did Lith. What Floria had pulled off was more a matter of cold blood and timing rather than talent, things she had proven to have plenty. Yet it was a highly impractical technique that required for the mage to stay almost still and focus entirely on one target to the point of ignoring their surroundings. Lith was afraid that the rage from being suspended was affecting Floria's mind. She had never been reckless, which made him worry. Neither of them had the time of saying anything because the plant folks that had been watching until that moment were now surrounding the corpse of the Trentling, which had reverted back to a young weeping willow. "Can you burn it?" asked the thorn woman who had defended the thrall before Lith exposed him. "Don't you want to bury him or something?" Floria asked. Based on what she knew, plant folks would happily feast on their dead to assimilate part of their essence and power. Chapter 8:12 Larul's Secret Part 2. He's a traitor of our race. He traded the gifts of life for those of death. His corpse has no place in our sacred ground. Only fire can purify his remains, and by turning him into ashes, his spirit will be cleansed of undeath and be able to start anew once he blooms again. A Trentling said. Freya snapped her fingers, and the dried willow was soon turned into ashes and carried away by the wind. Once killed, a thrall would lose all the vigor that their blood core granted them, and their body would revert to the shriveled state that constantly feeding their master inflicted upon them. I must say, I would have never expected for a human woman to be so strong and powerful. Watching you killing a filthy Grendel was exciting. A male dryad wearing nothing but a smile and sporting a 6-abs pack you could grate cheese on said, while grabbing Floria's hip. "I was hoping you could show me some more of your moves, if you have the time." The dryad was beyond handsome and tall enough to look her in the eye. Yet Floria just grabbed his wrist before he could go any further and just said, "Thanks, but no. I'm on a mission and I've no idea who I can trust. There could be another like him hidden among you." At her words, all plant folks looked at each other with eyes full of suspicion, at least until Lith patted each one of them pretending to be using a diagnostic spell. "You're all clean. There are no more thralls here. You can stop doubting each other, and maybe you could help us." Lith said, "Have you noticed?" He was cut short when the female thorn hugged him from behind, squeezing her full breasts against his back. Her form was now perfectly compressed, making her look just like a human woman with emerald skin and blonde hair. Every part of her body was soft and warm. Her touch was a sensual caress. "I don't feel too well. Probably it's because I've partially merged with that scum. I think I need a more throughout examination," she said. "No, you don't," Lith replied while pushing her gently but firmly away. He was tired of those shenanigans. Damn, plant folks are utterly insane. They really don't care about anything but power. 1 minute ago, she wanted to beat me up. Now she wants to eat me up. I wouldn't trust them even if I was still single. He thought. "We're looking for Erlich's last known headquarters." All the plant folks pointed at the most withered tree house, just a few meters from them. Lith was relieved to notice that both the dryad and the thorn didn't seem angry for being rejected, just disappointed. "Have you noticed anything, or anyone suspicious around here?" he asked, receiving so many answers at once that he had to interrogate them one at a time. It turned out that plant folks were paranoid enough to be in Lith's league. Not only did they point fingers at each other, but also to everyone living in the neighborhood. "Okay, forget about it. Do you have any idea why even the neighboring houses are partly withered?" Lith was repeating the questions that Kala was whispering in his ear with a spell. The enthusiasm for the battle had momentarily made the plant folk forget about her existence, and she wanted to exploit the situation as long as she could. The moment they noticed her again, best-case scenario, the plant folks would refuse to help. Worst-case scenario, Kala would have to fight again. No clue, but we found it ominous as well and reported it to the guards. Yet not even them found a decent explanation. A male thorn said, "We thought that it was due to some infected feeding upon them, or because Erlich and his minions had poisoned the ground, but it's not the case. As you've pointed out, they should have recovered at this point. Even though houses aren't plant folks, they still possess quite powerful regenerative abilities. The undead have been put to flight days ago, and the buildings checked for infected. Everything turned out clear, and yet." He pointed at the fallen leaves and the blackened windows. If all the houses of the city block were blooming as if it was spring, Erlich's hideout seemed to have just come out of winter, while the neighboring houses looked to be at the start of fall. This makes me wonder why Erlich didn't infect the tree houses. They would make a powerful juggernaut. Freya asked, drawing the undesired attentions of both males and females creatures. Larul's buildings are not alive as you and I are. A female thorn tried to hold Freya, but she dodged in time. They lack sentience and they'll never gain it. They are grown with the purpose of giving every one of us a place to live. They are just a means to an end, like your cattle. Why do you say that they will never gain sentience? Larul seems abundant in world energy, and they are living beings. On top of that, their ability to respond to their owners will make them look almost sentient already. Freya dodged the strong arms of a Trentling as well. That almost makes all the difference in the world. The tree houses are just regular trees, but being planted in Larul grants them special properties. What you mistook for intelligence is just the energy of the world sapling coursing through them, said the female thorn who had hit on Lith. World sapling? Lith asked. The offspring of the world tree, the first and most ancient among all plant folks. Not only are they alive, but they are also the only reason why our kingdom has peacefully existed for centuries. World saplings supply each city with enough magical power to allow everyday life and protect us from all intruders. They are the true ruler of our kingdom since each city is nothing but a manifestation of their power. Now you've lost me. Floria was on the verge of starting to chop hands and heads if someone tried to grope or caress her again, but she could only grin and bear it. She could recognize the look in the plant folks' eyes. It was the same look that her suitors who were too desperate or drunk had while revealing things they shouldn't talk about just to try and impress her. The fight seemed to have sent them into a mating frenzy. Making them snap out of it would have probably meant that they would become hostile again. If these world saplings are so powerful, why do you even have a ruler? Why don't they stop Erlich? She asked. You humans call the world saplings plant liches, but they are so much more. Such a powerful creature doesn't reason like a mere mortal. They choose a place abundant in world energy as their home, and then they focus entirely on the search for knowledge. Like liches, they become so engrossed in their magical research and their attempts to reach the next step of evolution to forget about everything else. But unlike the undead, they are alive and benevolent. In exchange for knowledge and resources, they grant us their protection and bestow the elected ruler of each state city a fraction of their power. In exchange for knowledge? Lith echoed. Yes, we share with the world sapling all our spells, magical research, literature, arts, everything. It's a small price to pay for a peaceful life. Chapter 8:13 Larul's Secret Part 3. When a male dryad tried to hit on Lith, his patience was on the verge of snapping, and so was the dryad's spine. Yet learning about the sapling's existence sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Suddenly the situation had become much more complicated. Lith and Kala shared a worried look, forcing her into action. Thanks for your cooperation. Now if you'll excuse us, we have a job to do. Kala said as the small crowd of plant folks opened in front of the white, as if she was carrying explosives on her back, freeing her human companions from their respective suitors. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Freya asked, patting Kala's head and appreciating its odd warmth. Yes, if what the plant folks have told us is the truth, then this city itself is a priceless treasure. If Erlich becomes its sovereign and gains access to the knowledge Larul holds, traveling undead will be the least of the kingdom's problems. Floria felt the dire need of a shower and to leave Larul as soon as possible, but abandoning her sister was out of the question. Indeed, I wonder if Marth didn't mention the possibility because it's a secret or simply because even he is unaware of it. With the stakes getting higher, Lith inwardly cursed his inability to overcome Invigoration's limits. He had already asked Faluel how she could visualize life forces with her breathing technique instead of using the Tier 5 spell scanner, but the Hydra had refused to share her secrets. Freya shrugged, taking her communication amulet out of her dimensional amulet to contact Marth, just to discover that even though she was channeling her mana through the acorn Lyda had given her, the device was still dead. The group reached the treehouse, and only when they were in front of where the door was supposed to be, did they realize how big the damage it had sustained was. The bark was of pale white, with only a few brown areas. Even though the air was fresh, the wood smelled like it had been soaked for a long time, making it swell in several places. The base of the tree was covered in mold, and even the rejuvenating abilities of the sapling were having a hard time fending off the infestation. The treehouse was also completely sealed. There was no door nor window, making it look like a giant rotting tree. Lith took his acorn out of the sealed box where he kept it, making sure to not touch it with his bare hands, but only through the gloves conjured by his orichalcum armor. The thought of being spied upon by Lean-In was bad, but if the acorn actually belonged to a world sapling, a most likely awakened being of untold age and restless hunger for knowledge, then even the simplest interaction with it might expose his hybrid nature. The moment Lith's acorn touched the white bark, his worst fears became true. Lith could feel an unknown energy passing right under his feet that used the acorn as a focus, while the outline of a door formed in front of his eyes. Fuck me sideways. This is worse than I thought. The acorn is part of the sapling, and the sapling has granted Lean-In part of its authority. The closest comparison I can draw is that the plant's city-state is like an academy, and its sovereign is akin to a headmaster. The question is, who actually controls who? Lith thought while he pulled the door open. A disgustingly sweet scent assaulted their senses, making even Calla cough. The space inside the tree was completely empty. There was no trace of its previous owner. Only the signs of an intense struggle remained. The walls were charred in several places, and several centimeters deep nicks were present even on the ceiling. The inside was even worse than the outside, with the wood randomly turning from ill white to rotting black to healthy brown, and with irregularly placed swollen patches that gave everyone the impression of being inside an agonizing beast. The house reacted to their presence by attempting to bloom a table and a few seats, but unlike in Marth's apartments, the process was slow and painful. The pavement and the sprouts squeaked in an almost human way that gave the group the creeps. The old wood screaming ended only when the makeshift furniture collapsed under its own weight, almost making the floor follow suit. In the effort to provide to its masters a minimum of comfort, the house had consumed most of the flooring's wood, but being incapable of regenerating it fast enough, the floor had become paper-thin. "Easy, big fella. Just rest and recover," Calla said while using a healing spell on the nearest wall and a diagnostic spell on the floor. The former was sucked like water poured on the desert, whereas the latter gave an unexpected response. Calla didn't see any wound or illness. She only felt pain. Something that light magic wasn't supposed to be able to do. "Okay, let's do our best." Lith's eyes flared with mana as he activated Life Vision, Invigoration, and the Tier 5 spell, Scanner. Freya used her best diagnostic spells, while Floria took out her Royal Forgemaster Silvery Wand to scan the area for any enchanted item that Erlich might have left behind. She had come to Lith's same conclusion, and even though her means as a healer were inferior, she was far from resourceless. The short time she needed to chant her first spell what was allowed her to notice Lith becoming pale as a ghost a second before he doubled over in pain. She caught him in time before his face met the floor. "Are you okay?" she asked while lifting and picking him up in her arms as if he was just a baby. Her act of kindness prevented him from puking his guts out. Lith was plenty capable of multitasking, but what he had not considered was that the tree house was his biggest, most complex patient ever. Just like the tissue samples he had previously examined, each cell sent him a feedback, causing his 3 detection means to give him a sensory overload. From the inside of the house, Life Vision perceived the green of the plants, a lingering black shadow of death, which was unclear if due to the tree's precarious state or the previous presence of the undead, and an unknown color brown. Normally, Lith would have worried about life vision detecting an unknown color. Yet, because of invigoration, the pain of the tree was reverberating through his body as if it was his own, while Scanner was feeding him a massive amount of information that was driving his mind insane. Whereas a human body appeared as something made with a mix of Lego bricks and an erector set, the tree was like countless streams that crossed paths with each other several times. Each interaction changed their shape, size, and color, giving Lith the impression of looking at an Escher painting while using stroboscopic lights and while being under the effects of LSD. Solus would have incurred in the same fate if the lack of a physical body had made her use to employ her long-distance mystical senses and share Lith's physical perception. "Now I do," he said. Floria had unknowingly dispelled both Scanner and invigoration, relieving the pressure on Lith's brain. Chapter 814 Larule's Secret Part 4. This place feels wrong. Calla shape-shifted into her human form. She doubted the house could bear the weight of her Emperor Beast body without incurring in even more agony. Also, keeping active the float spell would divert focus that she preferred to employ to clear the mystery at hand. "I know nothing about plants' life force, but still I've got the feeling that the big guy has been turned inside out. Things get even worse downstairs," Freya said, causing a perfectly circular hole to open in front of her. "What about the stairs?" she asked, yet the house remained silent. Freya jumped down the hole, using air and earth magic to soften her landing, quickly followed by the others. "Solus, what the heck is the brown?" Lith asked, trying to make sense of the dense fog that life vision perceived in their surroundings. "Based on your memories, we've met this only once in the past, but back then you weren't able to see it. It's the mold. Remember that even according to Earth's science, fungi are not plants." "So I'm seeing spores?" "Nailed it in one." Solus modified Lith's sight to highlight all the mold patches that on a closer look were eating at the treehouse's roots. "I think we should get rid of them. It will help the tree to recover." "I think not. This is the city of plants, not of fungi. Hence Erlich must have brought or engineered it on purpose. Once we discover why Erlich wants to keep us away from here, we'll need the mold as evidence." Lith thought. "We need to be careful," Calla said while looking Lith in the eyes. "I don't like this place nor the infestation. Traps can have many forms based on their intended prey, so the enemy might have left something behind that would not bother plant folks, but that might prove lethal for us mammals. As for the mold, it's not supposed to be here. Places like Larule are intended to be a paradise for plants. I would understand if it was a symbiote, but the fungus is clearly a parasite." Lith had learned his lesson and used only one diagnostic ability at a time. Life vision confirmed to him that the treehouse's life force was even weaker underground, where the infestation was at its worst. Invigoration continued to make him experience part of the living structure's distress, but whatever the tree was trying to communicate, Lith could only understand its screams of pain. Last but not least, when he used Scanner again, he focused on a small area instead of trying to examine the whole place at once. He chose a spot free from the mold, to avoid having interferences, and because Calla's words made his paranoia go full throttle. The memory of the fungal creature from Kulla was still vivid. Lith remembered how such creatures could move their consciousness at will, turning what looked like harmless patches of mold potential into the body of a powerful creature. Until he had a clear understanding of Erlich's resources, Lith wouldn't underestimate the enemy. Scanner showed Lith that the life force of the treehouse was like a river with countless tributaries. Since studying a still point of such a dynamic phenomenon was pointless, he stopped focusing on the physical tree in front of himself and followed the life flow it generated instead. It allowed Lith to understand that every single branch, every single leaf created its own flow, contributing to shape a powerful stream that coursed from the top of the tree to its deepest root. "Damn it, I'm way out of my area of expertise. Plants and animals are too different. I need to speak with Quilla." Yet Lith didn't stop his work, hoping to find a lead for their suspicions. Scanner was the only spell that he had in common with fake mages, so whatever he found, he would be able to share it with everyone. Freya used a few of her personal diagnostic spells, but to no avail. They simply were ineffective on a life form so different from those they were intended to. Scanner was the only one that provided her with some data, but just like Lith, she had no idea how to interpret it. Her hands ran down the bark, feeling the fluctuations in the tree's life force, allowing her to discover that it didn't become weaker near the patches of mold. It actually became stronger. It made no sense, hence it piqued her curiosity. Freya considered herself a dimensional mage, but she had never stopped honing her skills as a healer. Being the guild master, she always led the most difficult missions, and being the only one with a specialization, the life of her people depended on her. After making sure that no one needed her assistance, Floria used the Royal Forgemaster spell, Tinkering Soul. It allowed her to pick up the lingering energy signatures that only powerful artifacts would leave after their prolonged use. Silvery threads came out of her wand that slowly filled the air. Then, they started to amass and compress, taking the ethereal shape of devices she had never seen before. Most of them had been used too briefly to leave behind more than just a shadow, while others were so definite that she could almost see their runes. Alas, their design was as alien as its users were. Giera's runes and forge mastering techniques made no sense to her. The only thing Floria could determine from her spell was that several artifacts had been applied in between patches of mold. By the Great Mother, these kids are impressing, Calla thought, almost regretting not having taken her time to attend the academy. She wasn't much of a healer, and now that Scarlet had left, she found herself envying the fake mage's legacy. I doubt I can find with light magic something that Scourge can't. I'd better focus on my necromancy and see what we've got. She activated her personal spell, Restless Echo. It allowed a necromancer to assess how badly the balance between the light and the darkness element had been upset, plus to gain insight of the kind of spell undead creatures might have used. Much to her surprise, the place was pristine. She couldn't even sense the traces of Erlich and his followers gorging on the tree's life force. If not for the fact that both Lyda and the plant folk living in the neighborhood had pointed the place as the Draugr residence, she would have had a hard time believing it. This doesn't make sense. Down here not a single undead has been created, no major darkness spell has been cast, nor the tree has been used as a means to nourish the undead's blood cores. Calla thought. Then why is the life force at its weakest here? What was the purpose of the devices that Floria's spell shows if they weren't intended to spread Erlich's plague? She left the others to their investigation and cast Restless Echo on all 3 floors of the house. To access to each one of them, a hole would simply open in the ceiling. Since plant folks had no need for stairs, they would just elongate their legs and reach their destination with a single step. What Calla found made her worry even more. Despite the terrible state the building was in, not a single necromancy spell had been employed. On the contrary, the light element was dominant, making the lack of darkness energy part of the reason why the tree had troubles recovering. Chapter 8:15 Life Poisoning Part 1. Undead using light magic spells is beyond odd. It's utterly dangerous. I must quickly inform the others. Calla rushed downstairs, where everyone but Lith was done with their own research. I made an amazing discovery, Freya said. The mold is indeed negatively affecting the tree, but the tree's life force has been unaffected by the infestation thanks to an external life flow that helps it to heal and adapt. It's just a matter of time before the tree develops an immunity and the parasite gets destroyed. It explains why no one bothered killing it. Yet I think the mold played an important role in weakening the tree house. Floria pointed at the still lingering silver ghosts. They have been placed on purpose between patches of mold, but I have no idea why. If only my amulet worked, I could take scans of the devices they used and ask Dad or the army about their runes. Lith ignored both of them and kept following the flow of life force inside the tree house. It took it a long time to do a complete round of the house, and on top of that, he had found several odd spots. The ones in the basement were exactly where Floria had conjured the echoes of the magical devices. But since Lith was too busy with his work, Solus collected all the information and started to make sense of it. I don't know what I've just seen, Lith said once he lost his focus. It happened the moment the treehouse's life force interacted with an unknown source from below. It was a presence so powerful that it scrambled his spell. To avoid sensory overload, Lith had been forced to cancel Scanner. He had withstood the massive source of information as long as he could, discovering that its energy signature was similar to the treehouse's and yet different. I'm no expert in plants, but my guess is that this wasn't a hideout at all. This was their lab. Lith said, if it was a lab, my spell would pick up more than a few magical devices. Floria said, I think you are both right. Kala explained her findings to them, and had Floria cast her Forge Master spell on every floor of the treehouse, just like the White had done. What the fuck? Floria blurted out in surprise. The higher they got, the more the magical devices she managed to track. Moreover, they got bigger and more powerful, to the point that she managed to read and recognize some of their runes. What use can undead possibly have for medical equipment? She asked. More importantly, why did they apply life support machines to the tree? And if I'm right, how the heck is this poor thing in such poor shape? Lith cast Scanner again, to make sure that Solas's explanations were correct. She believed that the places where the tree's life force was still twisted and turned matched the position of the magical devices spotted by Floria, but it was just a guess. The tree was too big, and its life flow too alien for her to properly mentally visualize what was where. This is bad, Lith said every time he checked the bark underlying one of the ghosts, his voice becoming grimmer with each result. This was indeed a lab, but its purpose escapes my understanding. Lith said, the only thing I know is that those machines altered the tree's life force, forcing whatever fuels its magical and self-repair properties to fight their influence. The tree is in such a bad shape, not because of the mold, but because the alterations the tree underwent make it unable to properly process the light energy. It's literally bursting with vitality, and it needs darkness magic to remove the alien source that's bloating it. If I'm right, this is the life force equivalent of mana poisoning. That's impossible, all the women said in unison. Life forces could be altered or exchanged with the use of Tier 5 light magic, and different sources of life forces naturally blended together, no matter even if the donor and the recipient belong to different races. Life poisoning wasn't even a myth or a joke. To any proper mage, it was the equivalent of theorizing the existence of dry water. I would have said the same until an hour ago, but based on my readings, the alterations are so deep that they created sacks of life force that are not recognized by the tree, which perceives them as a disease. It causes the tree to mobilize its life force in the attempt to get rid of the sacks, but it only ends up strengthening them. To add insult to injury, even though the results of this experiment are horrifying for its victim, they don't seem to have any practical use. There are countless more effective and less expensive ways to torture someone. I think we need Quilla, Marth, or anyone that can make heads or tails of this contraption. Lith said. By the time the group left the building, the sun was about to set. They were all tired, hungry, and confused. Freya had even double-checked the treehouse's life force, refusing to believe that life poisoning really existed until she saw it with her own eyes. Back in Marth's lab, the enthusiasm from the earlier discovery had been drowned in hard work and failed experiments. Quilla was struggling to find a way to separate the host from the symbiote without killing them both. The patient was her priority, but a live specimen would allow her to grasp the true intentions of the enemy. Being it a man-made disease, finding a cure without understanding its underlying principles would mean that if Erlich had more strands of the parasite, they would have to start from scratch every time. The main problem, even for a keen expert of Tier 5 magic like Professor Marth, was that the life stream of the plant folk host and of the parasite were fused together on a cellular level. It was the reason why they had missed the second life force up to that point. The parasite was devised so that it would grow following its host, so that both his life force and mana flow would remain undetectable. Its only weak point was Solas's mana sense, which had allowed her to perceive the pseudo-core, since unlike what happened with the bugbears, the parasite was already fully developed. It covered its host like a second skin, creating a perfect double that granted its victim part of the powers of a Draugr with none of its downsides except for their hunger and their greed. It was the greed that actually made it hard for plant folks to resist the corruption of their mind. The more powerful they became, the more things they wanted, and the Draugr nature would easily turn desire into compulsion. I'm sorry, Professor. I've no clue how to proceed. All of my experiments failed, and all my theories turn out to be wrong. Quilla's eyes were bloodshot from the strain of constantly looking through vision-enhancing devices under a strong light. Good gods, Quilla. If you're useless, Then what about us? You're here from less than a day and you already want a solution? If you keep beating yourself like that, you'll get bald. Ask Vaster. Mart laughed, patting her back in consolation. But Professor, people are dying right now, and if we don't stop it, the plague will pave the way for war. Chapter 8:16 Life Poisoning Part 2. People die every day, Quilla. Marth sighed. Even if it's horrible, this time war would give us a common enemy and the opportunity to stop our pretentious squabbles. There's so much the three great countries could learn from each other. You have no idea for how long I wanted to speak with my colleagues from the other nations. Besides, it's too soon to despair. We know this plague is artificial, hence it must have a kill switch. We even know the cure for its original strand. We already have all we need here. It's only a matter of putting together all the pieces of the puzzles. If we can't, it means we are still missing some of them. Don't obsess yourself with the cure and focus on the illness. Once we understand how to recreate it, we'll also learn how to treat it. Quilla wanted to reply that it would be her relatives to fight in the front lines, but she was too tired and hungry to reply. In her frenzy, she had skipped lunch and was about to skip dinner as well. When she saw the warp steps opening in the middle of the lab, she prayed for good news. Took you long enough for a simple recon. Have you found our undead? Marth asked. They had no idea that the parasite contained Erlich's tissue, and even that small piece of knowledge would have been a game changer. No, but we can rule out Grendel's as well. Calla said before recounting them their encounter with the thrall and the discoveries they had made in the treehouse. Are you sure about it, Lith? Marth was having a hard time to prevent his disbelief to leak into his voice. You're the most competent healer that I know, and I would take your word at face value if not for your lack of understanding about plant folks. Damn sure. Lith spoke gibberish while his hands performed random gestures before sharing with Marth what he had seen through a holographic 3D depiction of the altered life force. Gods, I wish I could do that, Marth thought in envy, and with him almost all of those presents. The members of the research teams were the cream of the crop of their respective countries, experts with decades of experience in the field of light magic. Yet none of them was able to create holograms without the support of a magical device, let alone create hard-light constructs. Professor, you can ask Lith for details later. Someone has to go there and take scans of the residual traces of the artifacts before they disappear forever. Floria said, maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's how Erlich farms the symbiotes. Someone else, to be precise. Freya said. Her stomach had finally settled up after being assaulted by scanners' results, and the long-suppressed hunger was kicking in. We're all physically and mentally tired. Unlike our enemy, we need some food and rest to work properly. A choir of growling stomachs agreed with her. Lith could go on, but Freya and especially Quilla were suffering from a massive headache due to lack of mana. Marth nodded and had Lyda bring them back to their apartments, where the table was ready for 8, and there were a couple of unexpected guests waiting for them. Camilla and Journey were discussing in front of a big holographic map representing the entirety of the Garland continent. The map was filled with multicolored dots, and despite the unconcealed hostility in their voices, it wasn't addressed to each other. Cammy, what are you doing here? Litha's question made both women jump off their seats and hug their respective beloved ones. You're not going to get rid of me that easily, she said while making sure he was all right. Camilla was used to Lith facing attempts on his life on a daily basis, but that didn't mean that she was okay with it. Mom, what's that thing? Floria pointed at the still open map. We're hunting for Manohar. The green dots are his known hideouts, the yellow dots are the reported sightings, and the red dots are where I almost got him. She snarled. I swear that after I get his sorry ass here to solve this situation, the moment he is done working, I'll kill him first and Marth second. You almost got him? Lith was flabbergasted. I thought it was impossible. The Royals are not stupid, and neither am I. We've been keeping track of all his research projects, making copies of his notes to know what was on his agenda. Thanks to that, we know where to search since the ingredients he's after are very, very rare. Journey replied, even ignoring the blatant violation of a mage's most basic rights. How do you even translate that gibberish? His handwriting is even worse than mine, Lith said, knowing that Manohar refused to write with water magic for safety reasons. Mostly his own, since he would use the first thing at hand to jot down his bursts of inspiration, be it a napkin or someone else's clothes. It made his notes easy to lose and hard to recover from his latest victim. It's more than bad handwriting, it's a code. We had to hire his mother to translate it for us, and believe me, she doesn't come cheap. Now sit down and tell me everything. Lyda clapped her hands, making several dishes appear out of the house's dimensional storage. Everyone was a bit embarrassed noticing that Lyda would dine with them, and that several side dishes included vegetables. Isn't it awkward for you? Quilla was afraid that eating them would hurt the Dryad's feelings. Not at all. Once something is dead and digested, it's just food. Don't worry about me, dear. I made sure that to respect your customs, no human meat was employed to prepare your dinner. The entire table froze at those words. Do you guys eat humans? Freya asked. Why not? Aren't they animals as well? We don't actively hunt them, exactly like we do for beasts, but if a conflict happens, they're a fertilizer as good as any other corpse. Lyda shrugged. It took them a couple of seconds to remember that despite the fact that their appearance closely resembled humans, plant folks weren't humans at all. It wasn't just a matter of a different skin color or traditions. Larul had its own culture and morals, whether they liked them or not. Kala had no problem with her food since the only thing she wouldn't eat was BYK meat, but according to her nose, there was none. Damn, if I ever visit one of those cities of Emperor Beasts Faluel told me about, I must remember to specify that I'm not a cannibal. Lith thought. Beasts shared such traits with plants, feeding indiscriminately upon every life form, even their own kin if necessary. Journey listened to their story, trying to use her expertise about human plotting and power plays to make sense of Erlich's plan. Her face looked like it was carved out in stone, never betraying an emotion she wasn't willing to express. But Lith could feel that Journey knew more than she was letting on. My opinion is that the plague is just a diversion, Journey said after asking Lyda more information about the size of the armies in play. If his aim really was to follow the rules and dethrone Linan in battle, he would have already challenged her. Chapter 817 Utopia Part 1. Also, if he really wanted to build an army, the better strategy would have been to send thralls like the Trentling Grindel you faced and infect only the most powerful plant folk instead of random people. It would have taken time, but undead can wait. Consider that most plant folks wouldn't reveal being infected in fear of being shunned or considered a traitor. All of this mess, even involving the three great countries, is too dangerous even for Erlich himself. Not only did he make himself an enemy out of the entire continent, but even in the case his plan succeeds, Erlich will never be able to feed so many mouths. Undead are many things, but stupid isn't one of them. The stupid ones never live long enough to become this dangerous. Undeath is something that cannot be spread carelessly, especially now that the human population has been dramatically reduced. I'm certain that even if Erlich somehow wins, he would weed out the weaker newborn undead as his first move as the new regent. In times of war, food is more important than gold. What do you think his real aim is? Freya asked. I wish I knew. Journey sighed. Yet it must be something damn important, and that can alter the status quo with the other powers of the continent. Otherwise, the undead courts would have never allowed for this. One of the reasons why the kingdom barely tolerates them is that the courts are a necessary evil. They take care of rogue, undead, and often take control of the criminal underworld, preventing useless chaos. To risk their shaky truce with the great countries, it means that they either have no other option or that they finally have the numbers to step up their game. Journey's words made the mood turn gloomy. The burden of all those present had just become much heavier. Camilla quickly changed the topic, telling Lith that she had already warned his family and that they wouldn't worry about his amulet being offline. I can't understand why Lady Ernest spoke like that. Her daughters are already under a lot of pressure, especially Quilla and Floria. The former has been basically introduced as Manohar's replacement, which means too many expectations for someone so young. As for Floria, I'm afraid she might become more interested in rescuing her career rather than Larul, leading to bad decisions. In her situation, a single mistake could get her kicked out of the army. She thought. Erlich the Draugr Trent's headquarters, now. Now that the sun was set, Erlich the Draugr Trent could finally stand up and stop staring at his treasures like a demented man. Yet being able and being willing to were two entirely different things. It always took a Draugr considerable willpower to step away from their resting place. After making sure that all the protections were in place and that whoever violated his sanctum wouldn't live long enough to regret it, He went looking for his second in command, Grimlock the Grendel Dryad. If there were more bad news waiting for him, at least he could give that annoying pest a proper beating to ease his nerves. Grimlock was too clever by a half and way too powerful for Erlich's liking. One wrong move and all of his sacrifices, all of his plotting would bring fruits that Grimlock would reap after using Erlich as a scapegoat. Damn it, I wish he was just some mindless goon. So far our interests aligned, but our ambitions never did. I can't trust him. Erlich opened the door to Grimlock's room, finding a pleasant surprise. The place was trashed to the point that there was not a single piece of furniture intact. The walls were covered in claw marks, and there was lymph splattered everywhere. Erlich recognized the remains of the Grendel's most loyal followers from their smell. They were unlikely to still be alive. What happened? Erlich asked, pretending to not notice the grimace twisting the otherwise handsome face of the Dryad. I underestimated the awakened. I wanted to get rid of them before they could check our prototype and make sure that their death would further compromise the relationship between Lorule and the countries to buy us more time. Yet not only did I fail to kill even one of those filthy humans, but I've also lost the most promising thrall of my herd. I spent years preparing him to handle the fury and power of a Grendel, but it was all for nothing. Grimlock gritted his pearly teeth so hard that they cracked, only to heal a split second later. The loss of the two undead was negligible, but his thrall was a huge deal. Grendels were almost extinct because they were plagued by a reckless bloodlust that consumed their senses once they assumed their true form. Grimlock was a master magician in his Dryad body and an unstoppable war machine as a Grendel, yet to achieve the best from both worlds it had took him a lot of practice. That's none of my business. Erlich smirked. I want to know about our plan. So my losses are my own, whereas Lorule is our plan. Grimlock needed his decades of self-discipline to not fight the Draugr to the death. Everything is going as we predicted. The infected feeding off anything they can get their filthy vines on are hiding the damages on the tree houses. We might have to leave this place in a while, but I've already prepared our next location. We've progressed by leaps and bounds compared to our first prototype. Erlich nodded, looking at the bark of the enchanted house surrounding them. Their control over the mold had improved, and the side effects of their experiments had yet to show on the outside. The Draugr placed his hand on the nearest wall and released countless vines that allowed him to take control of the agonizing tree. He made sure that all the damages would be hidden by a healthy layer of bark, making it impossible to spot them from the outside again. The undead of the Garland continent must have become soft after establishing their courts for missing such an opportunity for so long. Erlich thought, if my plan succeeds and I manage to not get killed by Grimlock, my dream will come true. As Lorule's regent, I'll gain access to a world sapling, and if my theory is correct, I'll awaken. It will give me the means to build an eternal kingdom for the undead. A utopia where we will not need to hide and cower anymore. Just by asking the sapling to remove the dew covering the treetops, the city will be plunged into an eternal darkness that will free us from the tyranny of the sun. I want to believe that the plague was a sign from the god of darkness, that all this suffering after losing our homes has a meaning. Very soon, undead will not be the neglected race anymore. Our awakened will not be able to continue ignoring us. We will not be just a worm hiding in an apple, but the owners of the orchard instead. My race will thrive, and I'll be acclaimed as its savior. Little did he know about the life-poisoning accident or that the mold was still where they had left it. Linan was a tricky enemy who had lulled them into a false state of security before launching an all-out attack that had flushed them out, almost costing them everything. Chapter 8:18 Utopia Part 2. Packing and moving the devices took priority, so they had cleaned most of the mold before escaping, sure that without the proper care and with the treehouse's natural healing abilities the little pest would die before the next sunrise. Luck, however, was a fickle mistress. The following morning, Lith was sad, while looking Camilla warp away. It had taken her and Solus quite an effort to not let Journey's words making him stay up all night in a fit of paranoia. Lyda was even sadder since she had spent the night alone. She couldn't fathom why everyone had turned her offer for company down, even Journey. Once they reached the laboratories, they discovered that Marth had never left. He looked almost as bad as when he was headmaster and had a frenzied look in his eyes. Is it morning already? Was his reaction when he saw them step out of the dimensional door. I need to take a nap, but first I must bring you up to speed. Things have gotten quite hectic since you left. Marth explained to them how the team he had sent to the treehouse had discovered nothing about the plague, but had confirmed all of Lith's group speculations. Ever since we collected scans of the residual images of Erlich's devices, the Forge Masters from all the 4 countries are studying the runes to understand what their function is. Marth said. 4. The question was on everyone's lips, but Quilla beat the others to the punch. Forgetting about the plant kingdom, even though you're in one of its cities, is rude, even for a human, child. A cold voice came from one of the nearby desks, where several samples of the injured treehouse had been placed in crystal cases. A 4th team was busy examining all the collected data, and despite the fact that they all looked human, they were actually plant folk. Their leader was Lean-In the Titania herself, ruler of the city-state of Larul, an emissary of the world sapling. Marth tried to break the awkward silence that ensued by introducing Quilla and her group to the leader of the plant folks. Sovereign Lean-In has decided to join us in the search for a cure since Erlich keeps hiding. The professor said, I'm impressed with how quickly you human work as much as I am with your lack of manners. For a species who cares about appearances the most, is quite the contradiction. Lean-In dropped the human form she had assumed to not scare her guests and reverted to her real body. She looked as if a giantess had been fused with several kinds of different plants. Lean-In was over 3 meters, 10 feet, tall, with wheat blonde hair, light green eyes, and slightly long pointy ears. Her skin, or at least the little of it that was visible except that on her face, was pearly pink. She wore a sleeveless dress made of vines that covered everything under her collarbone. Several branches came out from the back of her head, and a thick bunch of leaflets circled around her forehead, giving the impression she wore some kind of tribal tiara. She wore brambles around her neck that yet didn't do her any harm. Leannon's neck, shoulders, and arms were exposed, and covered with what would look like complex tattoos to a layman, but Lith recognized them as runes. Small branches also grew on her forearms, where her skin was mostly bark covered in ivy. Her hands had slender fingers, ending with long nails that, together with the wrinkly appearance of the wood and their darker color, made them look like belonged to a much older woman. There was beauty in her, but no kindness nor warmth. Lith's instincts warned him that the creature in front of him was more ruthless than most abominations he had ever met. To her, kissing a baby or twisting their neck was the same thing. I meant no disrespect, Your Majesty. Quilla gave the sovereign a curtsy without being intimidated. Between her etiquette lessons and facing the ODI in combat, Lean-In had to try much harder to impress her. Until yesterday, I wasn't aware that plant folk had their own kingdom. Also, I've yet to see any of Larul outside the walls of this lab, so my knowledge of your world is too limited to call it a country. If I offended you, I ask for your forgiveness. There's no need to apologize, child. Your ignorance just reassures me that we've been doing our job right. Our secrecy is what has protected us so far, preventing countless conflicts with small men plagued by even smaller minds. Lean-In said while looking at the members of the group one at a time. The sovereign has a bright blue core and an uncanny physical prowess. Solus thought. Her dress hides several powerful artifacts, but their pseudo-cores are of unknown design, so I have no idea what they are meant for. Her tattoos are enchanted and exude quite the magical power. My guess is that they are an array of some kind, but not like those we have met so far. The runes don't draw power from Lean-In. On the contrary, they allow her to receive it from an external source. It must be the way she sealed her contract with the sapling. Lith thought. The Titania was impressive even without the help of the ancient awakened tree, but after meeting Faluel and Ragu, a blue core wasn't enough to worry him. I've come here to help you, Lean-In said. Professor Marth told me that you intend to examine the treehouse, correct? Quilla nodded. Then it's best if I accompany you. I heard about Erlich's previous attempt at your companions' lives, and I don't want that to happen again. Also, I'm the only one that knows how the treehouses work, so you'll need me to understand whatever you might find. A snap of her fingers brought them straight to their destination, in the basement where the side effects of Erlich's experiment were still eating away at the living house's essence. The devices you've spotted, mage urnas, have been crafted by my kin, and so they're runes. I've never seen anything like that, but I know my people's magic enough to understand its purpose. They are the forge-mastered equivalent of what you call body sculpting. I thought plant folks didn't practice light magic. Freya said. We don't. Our regenerating abilities make it useless up to Tier 4 and plain torture at Tier 5. The only way to alter our life force is to do it all in one go. Unlike you humans, we can't be treated a little at a time. Any alteration of our life force is quickly corrected, just like what happens for our bodies. If even a small trace of our original essence remains, the entirety of the Tier 5 spell is nullified, but it takes time and involves a lot of pain. Linan said, What kind of mold is this? Lith pointed at the gray patches infesting the roots. I don't know. It's not native of the Garland continent, and I doubt it's even natural, but I can't be sure. Fungi are as numerous as plants, plus I don't speak their language. They are as different from us as we are from humans. Sorry guys, but I need silence to concentrate, Quilla said. She followed Lith's instructions, using her personal version of the Tier 5 spell scanner to study the treehouse's life force. Chapter 819 Erlich, S-Plan Part 1. Quilla followed the life force's movements throughout the tree's huge body, dwelling mostly on the sacs of corrupted life force and the areas affected by the mold. Quilla knew nothing about gardening, but as a healer, she could understand an illness just by looking at the effects it had on her patient. Linan was itching with curiosity, wondering why she didn't feel anything amiss during her first visit after Erlich's escape, and why her mystical senses were still unable to sense her subject's suffering. I could temporarily merge with the tree to understand what's happening or examine the mold, but I can't risk interfering with the little Ernest's work. She thought, my link with the world sapling might enhance the treehouse healing factor and erase all traces of Erlich's experiment. Time passed, and when Quilla's consciousness returned to the roots, she followed them and went deep underground. Lith had been forced to stop at that point. The mass of life force was too great and complex to follow it by using means devised to study humans. Quilla, instead, had adapted scanner to make it work on plant folk, so when the interference assaulted her senses, she was able to shield her mind and continue following the treehouse's life force. What the heck? Quilla suddenly snapped out of her spell. Her face turned pale while huge droplets of cold sweat quickly appeared on her face. What's wrong? Lith had been on guard the whole time, yet he had no idea what could scare her so badly. There's something down here. A creature so powerful that barely approaching its consciousness almost damaged my mind. How can a human reach out to the sapling? Linan was shocked. No one could interact with the plant folk's ancestor without their existence being acknowledged by them and being bestowed the runes that adorned her shoulders. That's it. It must be the world sapling that fuels the treehouses. Freya sighed in relief, giving Linan the plant equivalent of a heart attack. How do you know about the sapling? She asked. Its existence was supposed to be kept a secret from outsiders. The edge on her tone let the group understand that she suspected them to be spies. Not wanting to cause a diplomatic incident, they told her the full story about their fight with the Grendel's thrall, including its aftermath. By the Great Mother, my subjects are a bunch of morons. Linan suddenly didn't consider keeping the plant folk isolated from the outside world a good thing anymore. They are so used to freely talk about everything that they spilled the beans with humans just to satisfy their urge to mate. So much for Larule's secret. The silver lining is that it will make explaining things easier. It might be, but that's not all. Quilla was eager to finish her report before the details of the impressions she had experienced while using scanner faded away in her memory. There's one more sac of life force between the creature and the treehouse. Yet this isn't just the tree's own life force twisted beyond recognition. It belongs to an undead energy signature. Solus. Lith asked while his partner used her mana sense to probe the ground below them. Sorry, there are too many interferences. I can't tell you if the energy signature of the undead sac and that of the parasite match. To Lianan's ears, Quilla's words were as scary as they didn't make sense. No one besides Larule's ruler was supposed to be able to perceive the sapling's energy, since even though the entire city was actually grown upon the roots of the ancient tree, Larule and the sapling were still two separate entities. The world's sapling was long since in a deep slumber, trying to prolong its existence and find a way to escape its inevitable death. The magically engraved runes on her body were supposed to be the only way to draw the sapling's consciousness and call upon its power. Yet a simple human claimed to have accomplished it on her own. A terrible picture appeared in Lianen's mind as finally everything started to make sense. She scratched a bit of mold from the treehouse's roots, lowering her defenses to allow it to invade her body as well. She was shocked seeing how quickly it spread from her nail to her hand, covering it in a matter of seconds. On top of that, the mold didn't just rob the Titania of her nutrients. It also started to attack her life force and converted her flesh into its own. "This is impossible," Lianen blurted out. "The mold is capable of overtaking its host life force, not just sucking it. It means that if it's not stopped in time, the victim gets turned from their original race into mold." The contradiction in her words was apparent even to Floria, who was just a junior healer. Yet no matter what the academy had taught them, no one could deny what they were watching with their own eyes. Lianen's hand had not shape-shifted. It had been entirely replaced by the mold while retaining its appearance while the infection spread to her forearm. The Titania snarled and stopped suppressing her strength. Both her life force and her body were too powerful for the flimsy mold, which was eradicated in a matter of seconds. "This is terrifying," Quilla said. "Life force can be stolen or shared with spells, but it always goes from one recipient to another while shielded by darkness magic, so that the two energy signatures never interact. Otherwise, the stronger life force would completely assimilate the weaker, making the healing impossible. Somehow, this mold is able to open a channel to its host's life force while also preventing it to swallow the mold's. I could feel my hand being ripped apart piece by piece as if it was being constantly cut and sewn back together," Lianen said. She immediately called the healers, tasking them to retrieve samples of the foreign organism to study it. Yet as soon as the mold was without a host, it died. They tried to cut it away with part of the treehouse, but it died again. "Damn it. Whoever designed it used plant folks' physiology against us." The piece of treehouse dies almost immediately after being cut away from the main body, since its vitality is already compromised after being affected by the mold for so long. The only way to sample it is to give it a live host. Lianen tried to have the mold move on regular plants or small animals, but to no avail. "I think I know what's happening here," Quilla said, giving Lianen the second heart attack of her long life. "Erlich has infected the tree with the mold because thanks to its abilities, it weakened the plant's life force enough to apply the body sculpting devices. As you said, plant folks' life force regenerates quickly, so without the mold, the devices wouldn't have worked. Then, for some reason that I can't explain," Lianen inwardly sighed in relief. "They repeated the operation on the upper floors. I don't get what their aim was, but I'm sure that they didn't mean to kill the treehouse. It would have been pointless since the tree's bad shape was bound to give away their position. Also, they didn't want to create the sacks of life force either," Quilla said. Chapter 820 Erlich's Plan Part 2. The only reason the tree is in this state is that Erlich couldn't predict that the interaction between body sculpting and the mold would cause long-term side effects. Tier 5 light magic twists the life force, while the mold is capable of preventing its victim from reclaiming its lost parts. Both effects were supposed to be destroyed by the tree's recovering abilities once the devices had been removed, but even after its death, the mold's life force blocking properties allowed the sacks of life force twisted by body sculpting to survive. Her words made Lith think about a mosquito bite and how the annoying pest would inject an anticoagulant to suck blood to its heart's content. The mold does something even worse. The toxin it produces prevents the victim's life force to recognize the invasion, so that the mold doesn't encounter any resistance aside from that of the immune system. Lith thought, if not for the synergy between the two attacks, the treehouse would have long since healed, like what happened to Lianen's hand, and we wouldn't have noticed anything. Quilla said, "Can you fix this?" Lianen pointed at the treehouse. The Titania had almost no experience with high-tier light magic, and calling upon the sapling's power would have been a liability. Lianen had finally understood Erlich's game. He had never meant to take over Larul by fighting her fair and square. He wasn't even trying to fight dirty. The Draugr plan was to take her crown without throwing a single spell. Lianen cursed her arrogance, which had led her to think that an undead would be so foolish to care for traditions to the point of fighting a losing battle. By becoming a Draugr, Erlich had gained many great powers, but also several limitations. His link with the Great Mother was severed. Most of his abilities as a treant were lost. Even if Li Nan was younger than him, even if she couldn't tap into the sapling's powers during a ritual fight, she was certain of her victory. Unlike her opponent, she would still be able to draw upon the nutrients in the soil to achieve regenerative abilities and a stamina that would put even an awakened to shame. Mana was the only thing she couldn't recover by feeding, but the same stood for her opponent, who would be unable to recover as fast as her. Either he chose to fight her one-on-one or army against army, he was doomed for. His followers were nothing compared to Larule's forces, even after growing their numbers thanks to the plague. It was the reason why Erlich had kept buying time with guerrilla tactics, to keep her distracted long enough to complete his real plan. Li Nan had still the opportunity to win, but to do that, she needed to do the hardest thing for someone who was both a seasoned veteran and a ruler. Asking for help. Yes, Your Majesty. I can fix the tree. Quilla placed her hands on the nearest wall and started to dissolve the sacks of life force in the basement, restoring its natural flow. Quilla also wanted to confirm her theory, hence she chose the biggest sack as her first target. The moment she undid the damage inflicted by Erlich's body sculpting, the tree's life flow destroyed the mold's toxin and moved on to the next sack. Quilla needed to give it just a nudge to fix the second sack as well. After that, she didn't need to do anything anymore. The restored flow triggered a domino effect that washed away all the sacks and killed the mold in a matter of seconds. The light element that had been shackled until that moment stopped bloating the tree's life essence and was drained down the roots back from where it came. Li Nan followed the entire process from within, through the vines she had spread throughout the treehouse. It allowed her to observe the sapling's consciousness as it moved back into the depths of the ground, yet the undead life force remained. The space between the treehouse's roots and the saplings was tainted with a scar that refused to heal. It confirmed Lianan's worst fears and left her only one way to survive. She snapped her fingers, moving everyone back to the lab. My dear allies, our situation is way worse than we suspected. Erlich is but a few steps away from gaining total control of Larule. Her voice was steady and her tone calm, yet it echoed like thunder. Everyone stopped working, incapable to believe their own ears. What do you mean? You're still alive and Erlich's army still in hiding. How can he possibly win if he never showed up? Martha asked. All of this was just smoke and mirrors. Li Nan waved at the tables, clicking her tongue at her own idiocy. His real goal has never been defeating me or creating more undead. His objective has always been taking Larule for himself. Literally, she added after noticing the confusion in the eyes of her audience, plant folk included. Larule isn't just a city. It pains me to admit it, but due to the chaotic nature of my species, of our inability to consider anyone else as either food or a mating partner, we would have never been able to build something so majestic. Larule's power doesn't come from spells or artifacts. It comes from the world's sapling that grows at its very center. It's a living being of untold age that shares its power with us. The sapling keeps the city hidden, granting to us a safe haven where our powers are multiplied and those of our enemies are locked. The sapling, however, is far from being a benevolent ruler. It's simply a dying creature who has chosen its final resting place. A sapling slows down its metabolism and enters into a deep slumber, using the knowledge it has accumulated during his millennia-long life and the magical research we share with it to try and prolong its existence. It's precisely because of the pact between the sapling and the plant folks that a ruler is needed. Larule pointed at her runic tattoos. I act as its consciousness and make sure that the community thrives so that the mind of the sapling is constantly fed by new knowledge. All the tree houses are grown from the seeds of the sapling, allowing it to reach and control them even in its dormant state, akin to an automatic reflex. The reason I'm telling you all this is because Erlich has found a loophole in the sapling system and he intends to use it to take over its body. A shocked silence fell on the room while the mages from the 3 great countries pondered the destructive abilities that such a creature would obtain. Whenever a treehouse has to be grown or repaired, the sapling simply wills it to happen, turning it into reality. Erlich has used a combination of body sculpting and an unknown moss on one of the sapling's offsprings to inflict to it a great damage for a prolonged time. He did it so that a simple sliver of power wasn't enough. A stray thought wasn't enough to solve the problem. Even in the sapling's dormant state, The pain the tree experienced was enough to draw the sapling's consciousness, and with it a link to the source of its powers. A link that Erlich used to connect with the sapling via the disease, just as I do with the runes. Chapter 8:21 Poisonous Tree Part 1. Erlich's first attempt failed because the undead energy he planted sped up the decay process of the treehouse and allowed us to find him. But there's no telling how much knowledge he has acquired in the process. Lenin said, if he succeeds, he will become more powerful than any sovereign of Larul has ever been. I can only access to the sapling's mana, whereas he would be able to access its mind as well. Millennia of experience, spells, secrets, and even the location of countless artifacts would all be within his grasp. Worst-case scenario, Erlich will infect the sapling with his disease and exploit its symbiotic abilities to take control of the sapling's body without it even noticing. This wouldn't allow him to move the sapling since such an act would surely awaken it with disastrous consequences. But all the mana that fuels the protective arrays surrounding the city, all the life force that so far has been used to create our housings, Erlich could employ them as he sees fit. Lenin said, this is way worse than I thought. The sapling might not be an awakened, but it's akin to a living academy and Linan is its headmaster. Yet if Linan is right and he gets access to its mind as well, the countless magical legacies that the sapling has accumulated so far would fall into Erlich's hands. Plant folks may be psychos, but thanks to their limited lifespan, they have no way to master such amount of knowledge, whereas Erlich would have all the time and the power he needs to become one of the most powerful beings on Mogur. Lith thought, I wonder if the council would dare to shrug again if they knew about this. Sola said, what can we do to help? Marth asked. First, keep searching for a cure. If the sapling becomes infected, it would be impossible to break Erlich's hold over its powers without removing the symbiote. Second, I should be able to narrow the possible locations of the enemy hideout to a few tree houses, and I need your help to find the right one as soon as possible. I have left the scarring that the undead energy inflicted upon the first tree house intact, so that you healers can study and learn how to recognize it. This way, by checking a suspicious treehouse's life force from the outside, you will be able to find Erlich's new lab. I could do it myself, but to do it I would need to physically merge with the tree, alerting the enemy, whereas your spells are undetectable. Lenin said, I'll remain on standby, ready to support whoever of you needs backup. Depending on how smart Erlich has decided to play and on how successful his first experiment was, I wouldn't be surprised if he set up more than one lab, or at least a few fake ones. By now, he has already been informed of your visit to his lab, and I bet that the news about the treehouse recovery will spread fast as well. Erlich might place fake scarring to force us to split our forces and lure us into ambushes. Start deciding who is going to scout the locations while I ready my troops. Once the fight begins, I can give you only a limited number of soldiers until Erlich makes his move. I'm the only one who can stop him, so don't count on my help either. The sovereign disappeared without even giving the healers the time to reply. They were her allies, not her subjects. But in time of war, anyone could be conscripted. Marth and the mages from the other countries knew it very well and didn't raise objections. As long as Linan didn't ask them to do something harmful for their homeland, they would obey her. After all, they didn't have much of a choice. Their orders were to help her to keep her throne, not to just cure the plague. The rulers of humankind already had the cure for themselves thanks to the Magic Empress. The only thing that worried them was to lose control over the undead horde. All the members of Litha's group volunteered for the mission, Kala included. They were both fighters and healers, so they needed only a limited number of guards. As for Quilla, she wasn't much of a fighter, but Floria wasn't much of a healer either. They decided that, in case of emergency, they would work together, covering each other's weaknesses. Their teamwork was on a league of its own thanks to all the awful things and the training they had endured together since the academy. On top of that, neither Lith nor Freya would have entrusted Quilla's safety to anyone else. They didn't trust plant folk. Their congenital lust for power made their loyalty dubious at best, and if they learned about Erlich's project, some of them might be tempted to jump on his bandwagon. They didn't trust the other healers either. Quilla was known as the most promising healer of the kingdom after Manohar, which made her a threat to the other countries since she was much more loyal and saner than the mad professor. It would have been easy to take her out in the chaos of the battle and pin it on the undead. Lith was kept in a similar regard, but his background made him a wild card, and as Milea had already demonstrated, everyone thought they had a shot of bringing him to their side. Each research team sent their worst healer to work to examine the darkness energy mass, considering them expendable. Marth would have loved to do the same. Quilla, there's no need for you to participate. We can send someone else, he said as soon as they were alone. The others had already left to study the scarring under Erlich's fist hideout. She had remained in the lab to revise the samples at her disposal, to understand if the symbiote could affect tree houses as well, and how to counter it. Sovereign Lean In asked for my help for a reason. I'm the one who identified the black mass under the tree, and I have been able to cure the twisted life force. Also, I've got a feeling that when we find Erlich, Lean In will be too busy dealing with him to take care of anything else. She replied. Meanwhile, Lith cursed once again his inability to use his communicator amulet. If only I could contact Faluel. She would be able to tell me if the sapling isn't awakened or not. If yes, I would get the council's help and this story would end before it can begin. If not, I'm certain that Faluel would help me. She might not fear any undead, but awakened or not, just the size of the sapling makes it a threat even for someone like her. I doubt she reached her age by letting her enemies acquiring such powerful weapons. Lith thought. He used the Tier 5 light spell scanner to find the scarring, and once he was done studying it with conventional means he used invigoration. Normally, it would have been impossible since Erlich's spell was so deep underground, but the scarring was just between the tree houses and the sapling's roots. Lith could use them as a support to conduct his mana without it losing effectiveness. Fuck me sideways. This is no scarring at all. The darkness element is filled with willpower. Chapter 8:22 Poisonous Tree Part 2. Best case scenario, it's another unexpected side effect of the experiments since now I got Erlich's energy signature and it matches the symbiotes. Worst case scenario, it's a trap that we might trigger by trying to remove the scarring. After his meeting with Faluel, Lith had practiced the meditation techniques she had taught to her, enhancing his willpower perception. To control domination, the first step was learning how to sense willpower, while the second step was to identify its focus points in a spell and replace it with his own. Lith was still inexperienced due to the lack of time for training, but the mass of willpower in front of him was powerful enough for him to easily sense it. He immediately covered them with a hush spell and shared his discovery with Kala, who had a hard time suppressing her enthusiasm. Fascinating. I never thought about using darkness magic in such a fashion. I must have a talk with this Erlich before he's put down like the madman he is. She said. Fascinating or not, we must check if the tree is infected, and we need it for yesterday. Lith had met 2 liches in his life, and judging by her level of craziness, Kala would be a perfect addition to the club. Since according to Solas's mana since the treehouse had no blood core, both the Awakened used the diagnostic spell Marth had taught them to check on the nearest wall. Unfortunately, the spell was meant to study small samples, not gigantic creatures. The area that Lith managed to study with it was clean, but that meant nothing. If it really was a trap, then the symbiote was likely to be dormant. Kala and Lith grimaced. Neither of them wanted to use invigoration. The treehouse was a giant living being, each cell of which shared a part of its consciousness. The first time Lith had attempted such a thing, he had almost fainted due to sensory overload. He focused solely on limiting the area analyzed at a time, while Solas searched for anomalies. Just as he feared, they found several small lumps of inactive symbiote located in the treehouse's key points. They had been arranged so that once the infection started, it would take them less than a minute to spread to the whole building. This is actually good news, Solas thought. Depending on the trigger, we might be able to safely cleanse the parasite. I doubt they expected that this could happen. It would also explain why they didn't care for fake mages studying the phenomenon and sent a thrall against you instead. They were afraid of what only an Awakened could discover. Well, yes and no. Sure, we can remove them, but there are too many lumps and we have no time to waste. A partial cleansing would slow the spreading of the symbiote and nothing more. Moreover, we have no way to explain what needs to be done and why. Lith replied. Kala had examined a much smaller area than Lith due to the strain of not being overwhelmed by the tree's voice, yet her findings were similar. Kala, do you know how to establish a mind link with spirit magic? Lith asked, hoping to avoid talking under the effects of the hush spell in front of so many people. Is such a thing really possible? Her surprise gave him the answer he wanted. After a quick exchange of opinions, he and Kala were of different minds. Lith wanted to leave the lumps alone, to not risk activating the trap, whereas Kala wanted to trigger it on purpose. If this thing comes alive, Erlich could use it as a giant soldier and screw us in a snap. We are not equipped to deal with something this big. Lith said, I agree, but at the same time, isn't it better to see what it's capable of? What if the tree houses we enter are in the same condition? Do you want to enter inside the belly of such a beast without any preparation? Was her objection. First, the darkness element has a will of its own. It means that it might alert Erlich and warn him of our arrival. Sure, we'd see what a possessed treehouse is capable of, but we'd also lose the enemy in the process, and we'd walk into a fully prepared ambush when we find his base. Discovering the tree's abilities is pointless if we lose the element of surprise. Their arguing went on for long enough that everyone noticed and asked them what was going on. Both of them refused to answer to not cause panic and decided to leave the decision in Lianan's hands. By the time they returned to the lab, Lianan was there as well. I have good and bad news, Kala said. They had decided she would take full credit for the discovery, to not draw any more attention on Lith. The good news is that the energy signature of the scarring is the same as the symbiote. If it belongs to Erlich, then the infected plant folk have Draugr tissues mixed with their own, and we can work with that. The bad news is that the treehouse is rigged. She explained everything they had found and their conflicting opinions as well. Thanks, Lady Kala. I must admit that at first, I feared your presence here. I thought that your partial undead nature would make you sympathize with our enemies. Yet you've proved yourself to be a loyal ally time and time again. You deserve my sincerest apologies. No one missed Lianan addressing the white with a title. Marth already felt his neck in danger, and it only became worse when the Titania gave both Kala and Lith a deep bow. Everyone assumed it was because she had appreciated his participation, but Lianan was actually old and smart enough to notice that every huge discovery had happened in his presence. The situation has stagnated until the arrival of this Verhen. According to Lyda, Kala is a natural awakened. If the human is the one helping her, it means that not only is he awakened as well, but also a powerful one. Lianan thought. As for the danger the infected treehouse poses, I'm sorry, but I'm with Lord Verhen. I can wither a whole neighborhood with a snap of my fingers, whereas finding Erlich is not that simple. If we lose him again, we might not find his trail until it's too late. Erlich the Draugr Trent's headquarters, now. Just like Lith had described them to Kala, the scar tissue between roots was actually a mass of darkness element bearing Erlich's willpower. What he had failed to notice due to his inexperience in dealing with plants, and to his paranoia, afraid to trigger the trap, was that inside that mass there was a good chunk of Erlich's symbiotic tissues. Magic was magic, after all. Even an array wouldn't have lasted for so long without a good number of powerful mana crystal, let alone a simple tier 5 spell. Lith and all those who had examined the situation after him had thought that the spell drew sustenance from the treehouse, but they had been only partially right. To sense an external threat, to manipulate a treehouse from a distance, Erlich had left parts of himself behind. Quilla checking them the first time had worried him to the point of rushing the relocation of his lab. The moment Erlich perceived multiple external willpowers interacting with his own, he knew that either he was the luckiest being on Mogr, or his plan had been figured out. Chapter 823 Battle of Wits Part 1. His long life had led the Draugr to not believe in optimism, so he put in action all of his contingency plans and started to prepare for more. It must be the humans' work. Ever since the new batch of pests arrived, things have started to go wrong. I don't know if the root of my problems is the human girl Marth was so eager to find or the awaken the Night Court warned me about. Luckily, I know how to throw them off their game, and by the time that I need to bring my plan to fruition. Erlich thought while activating his communication amulet. His control over the sapling was still rough, but after corrupting his latest dwelling for long enough, he was able to deactivate the arrays that covered the city within its area. After his arrival to the Garland continent, before he could enact his plan, Erlich had made contact with all the undead courts to find out which one of them would be the best partner. He didn't expect that the Dawn, Dusk, and Night Court would set aside their differences, agreeing to a common strategy. The courts had been founded as a means for the undead to protect themselves from the persecution of the lesser races, But with security and time, they had started to yearn for more. They had grown sick of hiding in the shadows and feed upon the scraps of society instead of being part of it. The undead migration had boosted their numbers, giving them the power that the courts had always lacked. The survivors from the Giera continent were mostly powerful creatures that had the wisdom of centuries and the might of the relics they had accumulated during their long lives. Visa the Lich, who was currently battling with the Magic Empress, had shown them that even with all of its limitations, an undead army could take head on one of the three great countries. Yet it wasn't something that even the undead courts could replicate. The only reason why the battle had lasted months instead of days was that, unlike common undead, liches had no fear of sunlight, no problem with solar cycles, and most importantly, they had no problems practicing forge mastery or dimensional magic. Visa had erected several gates before launching her attack, allowing her troops to move as fast as those of the Empire. When they were victorious, fresh troops would reinforce the offensive, allowing them to cut deep in the Empire and secure their hold. When they were defeated, the undead could retreat quickly and safely, with the Lich herself covering her hordes. Visa wasn't afraid of dealing with a whole army by herself, since no matter how many times they destroyed her, she always had a spare body at the ready. Erlich's plan was exactly what the courts needed. With the Plant Folks Gate network, they too could fight with any opponent on equal grounds. They needed the Draugr because Giera's liches had not left their homes. Liches didn't feed on the living, they only needed to keep their phylacteries safe. As for those of the Garland continent, they had refused to help. Or better, that was the only explanation the courts could think of. None of the messengers of the courts had returned undead to tell the tale. Disturbing a lich during a critical phase of their research was a deadly feat, and liches always thought of being in a critical phase of their research. Approaching Visa had proven to be pointless as well. She was willing to help, but only in exchange for their literal undying loyalty. She had devised slave rings that worked on undead and demanded to her servants to wear them. The courts wanted her as an ally, not as their master, so they had turned down her generous offer. The act had enraged Visa and left them Erlich as their only hope. He had contacts in all the three courts, so it didn't take him long to find the best man for the job at hand. After the huge fiasco in Other, Kalen the Vampire had lost everything because of Lith. The death of his chosen, of Count Zolver, and his failure in the negotiations with the Griffin Kingdom had led the Night Court to strip Kalen of his rank, turning the centuries-old vampire into a social pariah. After months of mockery and humiliation, he had abandoned the court, becoming an outcast. It was the only way to achieve his revenge without being restricted by the rules of undead society. He had attempted for over a month to find Lith, but the task had proven to be a nightmare. Lith moved as fast and silent as a ghost. No matter how much Kalen spent to corrupt his sources in the army, the ranger was never where he was supposed to be. The vampire had no idea that thanks to Solus's new powers, the position Lith provided in his reports was purely nominal. He would have the army amulet scan a location in the north just to warp with his tower back in the south of the kingdom. Infiltrating Belius had proved to be impossible. No matter how rich he was, the city's security measures were so strict that he couldn't get in. Among the city arrays, there was one able to detect the undead. The crown spared no expenses to keep the courts out of nerve centers of the kingdom. It made Camilla untouchable for him, just like the Queen's Core units outside Litha's house made kidnapping a member of his family suicidal. Kalen could have killed one of them from a distance, but his thirst for revenge couldn't be quenched by such an impersonal act. He wanted Lith to know who was the architect of his misery and why he was being punished. "What do you want, Erlich?" Kalen's spite for the Draugr was only second to the one he held of the courts. "You're already capable of staying awake during the day." Remarkable. Erlich didn't care for respect as long as the other party kept their end of the bargain. "Are you interested in regaining your position in the Night Court, if not in rising even higher?" "What's the deal?" Kalen knew that Erlich had no authority in the courts. He was their golden boy, but that was it. At least until his plan succeeded. After that, the Draugr would become a leading figure, if not the leader of all courts. Alas, between saying and doing, there were a lot of people to slaughter. My plan was going smoothly, but in the last few days, I've run into a few complications. I hoped you could help me deal with them. Erlich explained to Kalen his current situation. I need you to buy me just a few days. Past that point, unless the council or a guardian intervenes, the events that I'm going to set in motion will be impossible to stop. How exactly am I supposed to do it? I can't enter Larul, and even if I could, I couldn't move as freely as your thralls and undead plants. Kalen replied, I don't need you here. I need you to deal with those bothering me. No matter how powerful a warrior or how cunning their mind is, the heart will always be their weak point. Chapter 8:24 Battle of Wits Part 2. Attack the ones they love, and they will either lose their focus or become mad with revenge. Quilla Ernez and Lith Verhen have proved to be too dangerous, but luckily, I know how to dispose of both of them at the same time. Are you insane? Kalen laughed, incapable to believe his own ears. It would take me months to reach Lusha, and attacking Archon Ernez in her own home would be a fool's errand. I understand now why you've fallen from the Night Court's grace, Erlich said with a voice full of contempt. Your brain doesn't match your power, just like a lesser undead. Kalen held his rage in, waiting for an explanation. He had nothing to lose listening to the Draugr until the end. You don't have to move from other. Give the Archon and her pupil what they want, and they will willingly come to you. Manohar? I have no idea where to start to search for him, and even if I did, I wouldn't dare face him. The last time the Night Court tried to capture him during one of his escapees, it was a massacre. He turned his assailants back into mortals long enough to slaughter them like pigs. I survived only because he mistook me for a passerby. My powers returned after less than a minute, but it was the longest minute of my life. Kalen shivered at the memory. He was a powerful vampire, but in life, he had been weaker than most. This is actually great news. If Manohar came to other in the past, it will make the false report more believable. Change the appearance of one of your thralls so that he resembles Manohar and lure the Archon to you. Erlich said, This vampire is an idiot, but only an idiot and a desperate one at that would believe my promise. Once I'll have control over the sapling, once I manage to awaken, I'll have no need for the courts. Conquering the plant kingdom is a pipe dream. Once news of how I bested Linan comes out, my plan will never work again. Yet I only need it to work once. The Draugr had never shared his real goal with the courts, otherwise they wouldn't support him. One sapling was more than enough to build Erlich's undead kingdom. He would be the only one capable of opening gates at will, to move troops or bringing his subjects to safety with nothing more than a thought. Even if the plants united against him and somehow managed to defeat him despite the power of the sapling, Erlich would still retain all the knowledge gained through their symbiosis. As long as his plan succeeded, it was only a matter of time before the Draugr could give his people the country they deserved. City-state of Larul. After Linan had unraveled Erlich's plan, she had yet to find a way to stop him. All her attempts to locate his position via the bond she shared with the world's sapling had failed. Her only option was to mobilize her troops and hope to find Erlich's lab among all the withering treehouses. The problem was that Larul was a big city, taking an area of 1,285 square kilometers for 196.3 square miles. Relying on eyesight and citizens' reports to identify the enemy position was akin to finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. The only silver lining in such a dire situation was that Erlich's claim on Larul didn't stand any longer. Even though he was an undead, he was still considered a plant folk, and as such, he had to abide by the tradition. To challenge a ruler, after defeating his constable, a pretender had only two possible choices of duel. The first was to challenge one-on-one the current sovereign, without the aid of any external means. For the pretender, it meant that they couldn't rely on artifacts, while for the sovereign it included even the possibility to call upon the sapling's power. Such rule was meant to put to the test the abilities of both contestants instead of showing who simply had more resources. Erlich had refused such a possibility because he was aware that on fertile ground, he wouldn't be a match for Linan. Plus the time of the duel was decided randomly. If it happened during the day, he might as well commit suicide. The second was a battle army versus army, which usually required the contender to be a citizen of a city-state and have grown their forces over time. It was the path that Erlich had apparently chosen, using the plague to gain followers since it wasn't allowed to foreigners, even if plant folks, to take part in the matters of a city-state. Just like Linan, Erlich was entitled to have his own court, which allowed him to employ his most loyal followers like Gremlich, even if they weren't citizens of Lorule, but the custom was very strict about their numbers. Now, however, it was pretty clear that Erlich didn't mean to follow the tradition. His growing army of undead and his guerrilla tactics were only meant to stall for time and give the impression that he was trying to rally more soldiers. His real aim was to gain control of the world's sapling and use it to take control of Lorule. Since now Li Nan had proof to back her claim, she had alerted the other city-states of the threat at hand and even requested their help. I can send you troops to help you search Lorule, but until Erlich is found, I can't risk sending away my elite troops. I've already changed the city arrays so that they don't grant access to undead plants anymore. I can't risk repeating your mistakes. Erwil the Redcap said. Like all the Fae of his kind, the top the vegetation composing his hair was deep red due to the blood of the enemies he had feasted upon. It allowed a Redcap to use the skills and spells of his fallen enemies, but each use would consume some of the stored blood, plus such abilities couldn't be studied nor learned. Thanks, Li Nan replied. This is a race against time. If I can find Erlich before he infects the sapling, the battle will be over before it can even begin. Yet if he somehow gets full access to the city's resources, I've no chances of defeating him alone. Don't worry, even if Lorule falls, we'll help you with all our means. Erwil, like all the sovereigns that Li Nan had contacted, were much less confident than he appeared. Giving to undead plants the opportunity to enter a city-state had always been nothing more than a ruse to lure the hated fallen members of their race and kill them. All of the challenge's rules had been written to make it impossible for an undead to prevail. No one had ever considered the possibility that one day someone would exploit their mockery to invade their home. Meanwhile, in the research lab, once Lith had understood that he could do little to contribute in finding a cure due to his ignorance about the anatomy of plant folks, he had asked Lyda to bring him back to Lucia. Thanks to their mystical connection, world saplings could open warp gates almost anywhere as long as there was plenty of vegetation and no defensive array. He told her that he wanted to visit his family, but he actually meant to ask for Faluel's help. Chapter 8:25 World Tree Part 1. Lith had no idea what a world sapling was, so he planned of using the only powerful awakened he knew to gain the Council's support, or at least ask Faluel to share with him her knowledge about the matters at hand. You have done well coming to me, Lith, Faluel said. She was in her Hydra form because he had caught her in a bad moment. Between her magical research and training protector, Faluel could only pay one head worth of attention to him. Not only is Lorule's situation quite dire, but also if you contacted the Human Council, you would have put yourself in danger. What do you mean? Lith asked. I've never lied to you, and I'm not going to start now. You have done wonders in achieving amazing feats while keeping your nature as an awakened hidden, but now that you've been acknowledged by the Council, the two worlds are bound to meet. You've already made yourself a lot of enemies in the human society, but now they can rely on the backing of several awakened you've crossed. Wait a minute. I've never crossed anyone. I've simply defended my life from those who made an attempt on me. Also, I'm pretty sure that I've killed all those who stood in my path, so who exactly has a bone to pick with me? Lith asked. Every single young awakened. Her reply shocked him, but what followed was much worse. You've slain Trias after he bonded with a cursed item, an event no one cared for as long as you were just a nameless ranger, but now you are a benchmark. You've killed the disciples of many leading figures of the awakened community, but most importantly, you've caused the downfall of their masters as well. On top of that, you've refused Raga's scouting attempt and drawn my attention. Those are all feats that garnered you respect, but also envy and resentment. A lot of masterless awakened depended on Garen to make their living, and all the young apprentices now have to fight you to gain their master's recognition. You have become a constant in their life. For the former, you're the one who took away what little they had and got away with it. For the latter, you've turned down the opportunity they never had, to become the disciple of the strongest human awakened alive. To make matters worse, you've also become the object of their resentment, since now, whenever they make a mistake, their masters compare your achievements with theirs. Just like the old awakened are thrilled at the idea to watch the heights you might reach, the young awakened want you to fall, both metaphorically and literally, possibly dying in the process. As you can imagine, they are more than willing to give fate a hand and trigger your destruction. Wait a minute, if the old fogies admire me, why don't they just stop their disciples? Lith asked. Because if their disciples beat you, it would mean that you were not destined to greatness, but just the spur others needed to reach their true potential. If their disciples fail, instead, you'll just have weeded out the weak for them. Also, don't forget that all the old awakened, Ragu included, want to bring you from the beast's side to their own. Lith didn't miss how Faluel had not said to the human side. It heavily implied that the human council wasn't treating the matter as a community, but considered him a bone of contention. Yet they don't want to treat you like a peer, they want you docile and humbled down for the use. Hence, they'll let slide most of what happens with the goal of forcing you to seek for their protection. Faluel said, "Isn't anything that the Beast's Council can do to help me?" "There is, and they would, if you were part of it, but you're not even my disciple. You're still a rogue awakened with no affiliation, otherwise no one would allow this disciple war, especially humans. Awakened are few in numbers, and recently many of them have died because of their apprentices' foolishness. The human council can't afford an open conflict with the beasts." Lith pondered Faluel words for a split second before understanding all of their implications. With the help of the awakened, all the enemies that he had made and that he had ignored so far would have the resources to mess with his life, both personal and professional. He even suspected that Floria's career was being endangered as a twisted way to get back at him. "Let me guess, you're not going to help me either. This way, I'll be pressed to fall in line and do as you say." Lith snarled. "Wrong." Faluel sighed. "If I wanted to force you to do anything, I would have put a price to my help against Ragu, or I wouldn't have mentioned any of that to you. The smart move would have been to let them catch you unprepared, to make you feel small and helpless. Then, when you were at your weakest and desperate for help, I would have casually sent Protector to help and renew my offer." She was right. Lith felt a jerk even more than usual for accusing the Hydra of treachery. Maybe Faluel wasn't his friend, but she was honest with him, which was already more than he could ask. "I'm telling you this so that you'll be ready for the worst. A trap isn't a trap if you know it's there." Faluel said, "I'm deeply sorry for doubting you and for my earlier words." Lith gave her a deep bow. "It's just that so many bad news at once made me feel cornered. And a cornered beast is the most dangerous one." Faluel completed the phrase for him. Even though it wasn't what Lith was about to say, he liked the spin she had given to his words. "We'll make sure that even those blockheads learn such an obvious lesson. I am willing to help you, but there's a limit to what I can do as just the ruler of Dirios helping one of the awakened kings of the Tron Woods. At least I can guarantee you that your family will be safe. Any attempts to harm your human cubs will be met with extreme prejudice." Her voice was just a hiss, yet it held a power that reverberated through the cave, making it tremble. Lith had an odd feeling about it. The vibrations were nothing like when he went all out. The Hydra's lair didn't quake so much as shifted its weight, as if it was readying itself for battle. "Thank you, Faluel." Lith bowed to her again. His enemies had lost the element of surprise, and as long as it was him they had to deal with, Lith was confident about his odds of success. "It's not me you have to thank. I wouldn't have gotten wind of any of this until it was too late if my human colleague, a Thung, didn't tell me about it." "A Thung? That young awakened?" Lith asked. "Indeed. My guess is that she likes you where you are. If you become part of the Beast Council, you two will never have to compete. Also, you would become a reliable asset as both a Forge Master and liaison with another race of awakened.